The stone block, centuries old and immovable, suddenly came to life, beginning its strange, unpredictable movement, as if a great ancient power had been laid within it. From this stone shell, unexpectedly and rapidly, a monster appeared, aggressive and furious, ready to crush everything in its path. Without a moment's hesitation, it attacked the people nearby, throwing itself at them with frenzied force. The main hunter who stood in its way was our hero, standing with his shield, ready to fight back, although he was not sure of the outcome of the battle. However, his shield, though sturdy, could not withstand the blow and instantly shattered, leaving the hunter defenseless in the depths of the Margoil dungeon. The man shouted a warning, but the young hunter, skillfully dodging, did not take the blow, but deflected it to the side, avoiding the deadly attack. The other hunters, confident in their abilities, exchanged glances and decided that it was time to attack, seeking to take control of the situation. One of them boldly moved closer and deftly delivered a precise blow, easily severing one of the monster's enormous limbs. Gradually, everyone joined the fight, surrounding the monster and delivering blows, each of which was precise and deadly, weakening it with every passing second. And suddenly, in a split second, the monster's eyes flashed bright red, radiating a strange, unearthly energy, as if coming back to life. The man with the shield, overcome with rage, shouted, urging everyone to take up a defensive position and let the magic finish it off. The others, gathering their courage, agreed to this proposal, and one of the mages prepared to attack the terrifying creature. But soon he turned to the main character, jokingly asking why he was still asleep, offering to pour some mana on him. The guy, introducing himself as Jason Haruto, a level 29 hunter, confidently promised that he would do everything now. Soon, the hero began to focus his power as requested, feeling the mana rapidly gathering in his hands. The mana quickly manifested, ready for use, as if waiting for the moment to show its power in battle. He immediately directed it at the supplicant, and the mage nodded approvingly, saying that it would be enough to defeat the great golem. The enraged creature, gathering all its power, rushed into the attack, threatening anyone who dared to stand in its way. However, the man the monster was approaching used magic, shouting for it to fall to the ground. Very soon, his power struck the creature like thunder, splitting it in two like a fragile toy that had been torn apart. Finally, the battle was over, and the heroes could rest, allowing themselves to relax after the intense fight. A man approached Jason, stating that, as always, he was of no help, and offered to help sort through the loot. Someone pointed out that he was dealing damage and shouldn't be in the rear, to which they replied that his skills were rubbish, but he regenerated mana endlessly. The interlocutor asked curiously how it was possible to regenerate mana endlessly, as it seemed unimaginable. The hunter replied that both mages and healers can also absorb mana, so he is only needed during boss fights. The mage noted that this was why Jason had been unable to reach level 30 for 5 years, while the weak hunter was stronger than an ordinary person. Jason, hearing this, was angry, realizing that they were talking loudly on purpose for him, but he didn't care. He wasn't going to leave. Shortly after all this, the hero found himself in the Taiken Guild, pondering what was happening around him. He wondered what it meant, whether he, as a hunter, had been transferred to the guild's production department. The man replied that no one wanted to take him to the dungeon because he was only level 29, and they wouldn't let him go alone. Of all his skills, Jason only had mana regeneration left, and he shouted that his mana was useful to many and that he was close to reaching level 30. That's why he asked for a chance. But the man replied that healers and mages usually had mana absorption skills, and he would be the odd one out. Besides, did he really think that his 30th level would change anything in his situation with the guild? The guild had simply decided to develop his strengths, and mana potion production was something he would fit in perfectly with. Jason wondered what would happen if he refused. Would they really kick him out of the guild without giving him a chance? They apologized and explained that he wasn't developing, so they couldn't keep him anymore because he was only holding them back. Sitting on a bench, the hero realized that in an instant he had lost his job, and everyone considered his only skill to be the endless regeneration of mana. But in fact, it was a special skill that he had never told anyone about. Surprisingly, he had acquired it even before hunting. Suddenly, a system appeared in front of him, asking if he wanted to copy this item, promising amazing possibilities. The hero gathered his thoughts, reached out, and pressed the button, agreeing to it, hoping for new adventures. As a result, after a few moments, his food was copied, and the ability was called Control-C and Control-V, allowing him to copy objects. However, upon awakening, he realized that this skill was quite useless for a hunter, although at first he was delighted with it. It soon became clear that the skill was only available to him, and as soon as an object left his hands, it disappeared like a mirage. Therefore, Jason cannot copy money or resell equipment, but there is something else that annoys him the most. There are level restrictions on copying equipment, and the Dagger of Loyalty can only be used from level 90. Due to the user's level mismatch, copying the item is impossible, and the guy was nicknamed Mano Nose for his endless mana regeneration. But in reality, he simply copies and pastes a small amount of absorbed mana, which does not disappear and can be transferred to other hunters. He tried to copy skills in the same way, but to do so, he had to kill high-level monsters, which he dreamed of doing. Then everyone would see what he was capable of. He wanted to reach at least level 30, and heard that the long sword of the Karyu dragon had arrived in Japan. Jason realized that the sword had 2 special skill slots and significantly increased defense, and its method was unique because it had its own level. As soon as the sword is in your hands, the user's level increases by 200, and it can be used from level 13. It is an excellent, legendary sword for a hunter like him. If he copies it, he will become a level 230 hunter, which is a ticket to a happy life. In a week, the sword will be shown in Japan, but the legendary blade has only 10% of its strength left, and is only good for a couple of raids. The sword's owners want to make money from it, and Jason realized that this was a great opportunity. If he could touch it just once, he would be able to recreate the blade forever. He only had to reach level 30, and in a few days there would be a battle in the lair of the Great Spider, unregistered with the Hunters Association. The mage turned to Jason, called him a photographer, and asked him to pour some mana for the upcoming battle. The guy replied that he would do everything now, but preferred to use his copying technique. Soon, a stream of power flowed to his comrade, helping him in battle and strengthening his magical abilities. The mage exclaimed that it was wonderful, and using his power, shouted for them all to burn in the fire of battle. The spiders fell one after another, and Jason couldn't help but think how much he hated fire mages in confined spaces. After the battle, Jason decided to check his level in the system, hoping to see progress and be ready for the upcoming battle. A guy approached him, reminding him that checking his status wouldn't change the outcome, but the hero wanted to prepare for the boss fight. His companion, guildmate David Aoi, jokingly suggested that this front row view was worth the money, but Jason didn't understand what payment he was talking about. David said that after they finished, they would get together and have a drink, and Jason knew that this man was going down into an unregistered dungeon. He earns money by leveling up, but he also takes food with him, knowing that it is a dangerous place that is not registered with the Hunters Association. Thanks to David, the hero was able to accompany high-ranking hunters. Someone shouted that it was time to finish and move on to the boss arena. The first man stopped and quietly told everyone to stand still, because ahead was the nest of a great spider, and that meant danger. Indeed, they were approaching the cave where the spider lived, along with its eggs, which hinted at a coming battle. This creature was called Alex, and he was the boss of the dungeon with a level of 80, which inspired awe in all the hunters. Jason thought that just looking at it made his knees buckle, and he didn't know if he could easily deal with this horror. David, encouraging Jason, asked what he was afraid of, because killing the great spider was easy, but caution wouldn't hurt. The main thing was to watch its web carefully, because once caught in it, no one could escape, and the eggs should also be avoided. If the eggs were broken, the spider would go berserk, and then everyone would be in trouble, so extreme caution was required. The magician, dissatisfied, shouted at Aoi, asking why he was wasting time on Mononos, as if he couldn't keep quiet. His companion apologized but reminded him that they didn't have time and that he shouldn't distract him, because they had taken him in out of the kindness of their hearts. After that, David moved forward and kicked one of the stones, which led to unexpected consequences. The stone flew off to the side and caught on a web that stretched everywhere, attracting attention. As soon as the stone caught, there was a loud sound, foreshadowing trouble for the hunters. Soon, the mistress of the dungeon realized that there were uninvited guests here, and this angered her. She immediately flew into a rage and rushed to attack the hunters, preparing for battle. The man with the shield shouted for him to be quiet, because his cries had awakened the spider. He had a shield, which allowed him to defend himself from the blow, but it was not enough. He counterattacked with his sword, demanding that she remove her hairy legs from him, fearing her attacks. At the same time, he reminded the others about her web and eggs, warning them of the possible danger. The other hunters understood and immediately rushed to attack from different sides, hoping to win. A bloody battle ensued between the hunters and the spider, and they fought bravely for their lives. Jason watched them fight and hoped that he might be able to reach level 30. The dungeon boss realized that these hunters would not be easy to deal with, and took other action. The man shouted to the others that the creature had started to spin a web, and that everyone needed to hide behind the columns. The wizard, undaunted, exclaimed that he had defeated such creatures many times before, and intended to burn the spider along with its web. Alexa did not stop and continued to release huge amounts of web, creating an atmosphere of horror. A protective sphere began to form right in front of her, which she intended to use for defense. However, the wizard's fire continued to approach, burning everything in its path and setting the surrounding area ablaze. When the fire reached the cluster of webs, it slowed down sharply. The boy screamed in horror that the spider had deflected his fireball. He yelled that this was bad because she was angry and would now show everyone her true power. Jason yelled at him not to do it, because such behavior would only make the situation worse. But the wizard did not listen, using his meteor shower skill, determined to show his power. The man shouted that he was completely stupid, because he could hit her eggs, which would be a disaster. The heroes already understood that everything was bad, because there was no time left to fix it. Upon closer inspection, it became clear that the eggs had already been hit and destroyed, which foreshadowed disaster. The man in the bandana shouted that everything was bad, and that everyone needed to run away immediately, otherwise the spider would fly into a rage. Soon, the web released by the spider struck one of the hunters, confirming the group's fears. David yelled at Jason to run behind the column, as the spider began shooting webs in all directions. Alexa was furious, her anger palpable, and energy emanating from her like a dark storm. Another hunter also got caught in her web, realizing that things were not going as planned. The same wizard who had destroyed the eggs asked in panic why his fireball had not worked on the web. Things got even worse when his voice attracted the boss's attention, making him nervous. He was frightened and began to beg her to stop, without doing anything unnecessary, but it was too late. Panic seized him, and he continued to shout for her not to come near and to get away from them. Of course, Alexa didn't hear him, and using her limbs, killed him instantly. The main character was horrified by what had happened, his eyes filled with shock. He found himself tied up in a web and realized that the situation was truly critical. Alexa, like a predator, continued to approach, destroying everyone in her path. Jason thought that this dungeon should be simple, and he just wanted to raise one unfortunate level, but now he was risking his life. Very soon, Alexa approached him, preparing to attack, her intentions clear. She struck with her limb, but missed, only slightly injuring the guy, which left him a chance to survive. Despite this, he knew that things were very bad, and that he was running out of time. At that moment, the system asked if he wanted to copy the selected object and paste it in place. In fact, this opened up new possibilities for him. Objects usually disappeared after being copied, but this rule did not apply to his body. So he decided to create a copy of himself, because if he died, his consciousness would move to the new version. The dead body would disappear without a trace, as had happened many times before. Jason thought that all this was terrible, and he would never get used to such sights. But he had no other choice in this situation, and he understood that. As soon as the guy moved into his new copied body, the monster attacked again. He used his ability again and, hiding behind a column, realized that this creature would not leave him alone. Even if he copied himself endlessly, nothing would change, and that alarmed him. Suddenly, he heard a sound and wondered if David was still alive, because he had been begging for help. Jason felt sad, apologizing and realizing that he couldn't help his friend. Alexa, hearing the voice, instantly headed in his direction, preparing for a new attack. Jason watched this and realized that the situation was getting out of control. The guy rushed forward, deciding that David had helped him when everyone else had refused, and if he didn't help now, what kind of friend would he be? He ran closer to his opponent and tried to hit him with his weapon. The attack was successful, but because of this action, the guy lost his concentration and was confused for a moment. When he came to his senses a little and looked up, he was relieved to see that his friend was unharmed. At the same time, a system notification appeared, informing him that his level had been raised. The main character was stunned and wondered how he could have leveled up. It turned out that his attack had somehow worked, and this filled him with hope. However, his joyful thoughts were interrupted by Alexa, who pierced him with her limb. Jason moved into another body again and thought that since his level had been raised, he needed to copy the long sword of the carrion dragon. He shouted that everything would be fine, because if he couldn't escape, he would kill her, even if he had to die 100 times. At the same time, he thought that the main thing was to inflict at least some damage in one of his lives, and rushed into the attack, believing that with his skill, she had no chance. The death of this creature was only a matter of time. 3 days had passed since he began fighting, and he fought day and night, spending about 50 lives. In the process, he broke almost all the weapons the group had brought with them, but his skills had improved significantly. The giant spider was getting weaker by the minute. Fortunately, it had no regeneration. After losing another limb, Alexa turned her back to the guy. Then she prepared to attack and began to release her web. Jason realized that this would not lead to anything good, and started to run away. But surprisingly, she released 4 projectiles at once. He tried to dodge, but suddenly saw the creature's limb in front of him. It seemed that he would not be able to avoid this attack, but he successfully jumped up, avoiding the blow. And, without stopping, he continued forward, full of determination. Jason was already very close to the creature's head and prepared to attack. He was completely confident and shouted for it to finally die. Gathering all his strength for this blow, he struck the head. Literally a moment later, the sword he had attacked with broke into pieces. The guy realized that things were really bad because he had forgotten to copy and paste. Soon his body fell to the ground, and he hit it quite hard. The creature he was fighting became even more enraged and prepared to attack him. Jason realized that things were looking very bad for him now. At that very moment, something strange happened. The spider's eyes went out and began to glow differently. Then her body split apart and began to crumble into pieces. All the main character saw was the explosion of his opponent's body. Jason was delighted with what had happened. He was glad that he had finally defeated this hairy villain. Now that he had won, the levels began to rise one after another, and the system announced that he had received a reward for destroying the great spider. The hero grabbed David and shouted at him to hold on, reminding him that they wanted to have a drink after clearing the dungeon. He promised to treat him to the best whiskey. When he was distracted by the conversation, he soon felt someone attack him from the side. Naturally, the guy lost his concentration and fell, so he looked up. There were small spiders, called newborns of the great spider of level 30. The hero shouted that they were mocking him because he no longer had a weapon. He understood that it would be difficult to fight while protecting Aoya. The guy rushed to his friend and covered him with his body while the small spiders attacked. The creature that rushed into battle first was cut to pieces in a few moments. The others saw this and, alarmed, began to retreat slightly. Then, as a group, they pounced on the man who had killed their kin. The girl who started fighting them used the Hellfire skill, and the small spiders were destroyed in the blink of an eye. The main character realized that Hellfire was the highest spell of fire magic, and there were only a few magicians in the world who could freely control it. If the guy's memory serves him right, there is only one such mage in Japan. And now we are talking about a knight who uses witchcraft, and she ranks 5th in the Japanese hunter rankings. She interrupted the guy's thoughts and asked if they were the only survivors. Jason looked at her and said regretfully that it was true. Elizabeth noticed the dead people and realized that the great spider's offspring had appeared, which meant that the eggs had hatched, and she flew into a rage. It seemed that the high-level group had been completely destroyed. Could this man really have defeated the dungeon boss, and in the company of low-level hunters, which left many questions unanswered? Soon, the main character found himself at the Japanese Hunters Association. He was in interrogation room number 2 and said that if the girl hadn't come, everything could have ended badly, and he was truly grateful to her. The head of the underground department also expressed his gratitude. The girl replied that she had simply done her job and had a free moment. All the items and reports about the giant spider had been handed over, so she said that Jason could leave now. She thought it would be nice if she could leave too, but the guy noticed that a group of high-level adventurers had bought themselves a pass. It was an unregistered dungeon, and almost all of them had died there, so would they really just let them go? Her companion asked if he really wanted to stay, because dozens, even hundreds of adventurers died every day in unregistered dungeons. They sign a declaration of consent to this risk when entering and exiting, not to mention low-level hunters. They pay bribes for illegal participation in dungeons in order to level up, and the association simply turns a blind eye to this. The desire to become stronger is natural for any hunter, even if it is illegal, but it contributes to their growth. The girl also asked if there were any more questions. Jason said he had none. Everything had been explained to him clearly, and he was grateful for that. The girl said that payment for the giant spider items they had provided should arrive in a few days. The hero thanked her, refused, and added that she had already given everything to Aoi. A few moments after saying this, he immediately disappeared from the place. His companion thought that he was clearly not an ordinary person, since he had refused a reward that was very valuable. Be that as it may, he was able to clear a high-level dungeon on his own, and the hunter Jason is definitely worth revealing. The main character, in turn, walked down the corridor and rejoiced that everything was fine with him. Then he ordered the system to open his inventory, and saw that he had a great spider rod. Since he had used his copying skill at that moment, he had a lot of rods, and Jason knew that these rods would be very useful to him. A few hours earlier, the system had informed him that he had received an item as a reward for destroying the great spider. The great spider rod has the same effects as the great spider web, exhibiting strong adhesive properties for a certain period of time when used. The available level for this ability was 40, and the hero didn't understand what it would look like, but from the description, it seemed like ordinary glue. All these deaths and all this work were for this nonsense. Perhaps it could be used as sticky tape against flies and mosquitoes, so he copied it just in case. After that, he tapped on this thing and didn't understand how to use it. Soon, something strange began to happen to it, and it began to unfold. Jason asked what the hell had happened and where it had gone, and the system reported that the great spider's rod had been absorbed by an existing skill. The guy asked in surprise what this was all about. Could this ability really be upgraded? Indeed, the system confirmed that the ability to copy an object could be improved, and the hero was surprised again. After that, the system reported that the ability to insert an object had been upgraded to a new level, and 3 skill options appeared. Jason didn't understand why they could be upgraded, Could it be related to obtaining the rod? If so, then if copying absorbed the corresponding items, it would also evolve. That was really cool. By the way, what was recently said about new options? Jason saw that the first option was an established item. It could be held for as long as desired, and the second was an object that could be inserted anywhere for a limited time. And the third option is to untie the web of the great spider. The hero thought it was a useless skill, but now he will try it for 1 minute first. A few moments later, an item appeared from the inventory. Jason realized that he had let it slip from his hands, but it didn't disappear, which was pretty damn cool. However, after the planned time had elapsed, the item began to disappear. The hero realized that it didn't disappear for a whole minute, and that was wonderful. In that case, he decided to copy as many as possible and set the timer for 30 minutes, and then do it for 100 or 1,000. At that moment, he was very happy and laughing in the Hunters Association, attracting attention. Jason thought that starting today, he was rich and could finally live like a human being. First of all, he needed to copy the sword of the Carisian dragon. 2 hours ago, a truck was speeding across the Rainbow Bridge in Tokyo. The road was quite busy, but nothing was stopping him from driving. The lead car was instructed to maintain its speed and distance, and they replied that they would maintain their current speed. George, a level 112 hunter from the International Hunters Association, turned to his companion and asked how many times the girl had been to Japan. Lucy replied that she had been twice, and that she was level 131 and a mage. The man noted that she had said that her mother was from these lands. She must be very happy to return here, he remarked. But the girl pointed out that it was her mother's homeland, not hers, so she simply didn't care. George asked if it was true that the long sword exhibition would end in Japan, and if she had applied for leave. His companion remarked that there was something she wanted to find in the Japanese dungeons, and the man said he hoped that this time she would find what she was always looking for. Lucy pointed out that it was none of his business, but that one day it would affect him too. The lead car reported that they were currently passing through the underground on Rainbow Bridge. Due to the electromagnetic waves of the underground, communication would be interrupted for only 5 minutes. George pointed out that the tunnel was directly above the sea, and wasn't that a problem? The girl replied that he was talking nonsense, because if the tunnel collapsed, it would be a disaster. The interlocutor said that someone should open the window because it was stuffy in there, and Lucy asked what was romantic about a dangerous underground passage. The man remarked that she just didn't understand, because that was the whole point. At the same time, just like on the Rainbow Bridge, an event was taking place in the office at the entrance to the dungeon. Roger, a level 21 newbie from the Great Sages Guild, said how boring it was to work as a ticket seller at the dungeon exit. The man next to him remarked that he was lucky, and yet he was showing off, because 3 weeks ago it had been hell on earth here. His companion felt something strange approaching him, and it hit him. He noticed the creature and wondered what it was. After looking closely, he saw that it was a slug, and it was so cute, but he thought he had forgotten it in this dungeon. So he turned to the man and asked if slime could appear on the surface. The man looked at him and said, "Of course not." Just as he was about to add something to his statement, he suddenly heard a noise. The footsteps were so loud that the man immediately became alert and reluctantly looked back. The creature that the men saw in front of them was enormous and cast a shadow over both of them. After that, the huge troll immediately rushed to attack the people. At that moment, the main character was observing his condition and carefully examining his characteristics. Some of his skills had increased by 30 and 18 points. His class level was 4th, and his skill level was 1st. Jason said that everything was fine, because his stats had increased. He hadn't died so many times for nothing, and now he was at level 50. When a hunter reaches this level, it is easier for him to join a group, as monsters in mid-level dungeons are usually of a similar level. Except for beginner areas, experience grows faster in such dungeons, and you can get more items as rewards, sometimes even rare ones. Therefore, it was easier to level up, and to start with, the guy decided to create duplicates of the Great Spider's rods and try to sell them at auction. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by people who were bullying others and rushing to make way. They were all in quite a hurry, and didn't understand how this dungeon could have collapsed. Jason wondered how this dungeon had collapsed, but was it really a breakthrough? The hunter shouted, asking why they had been thrown in there earlier, and the guild member replied that they said the van with the legendary sword had fallen into a trap. Therefore, a request for help was sent to the International Hunters Association. The hero wondered if it was the long sword of the Kyrian dragon. It turned out that he was surrounded by monsters because of the breakthrough, and it was all bad. Flying ships were gathering on the roof of the Hunters Association. The hunters asked to quickly request help from other guilds, their primary task being to protect the wagon with the legendary items. The man asked what kind of nonsense this was and who had given this order, to which the girl replied that she was now in charge and was the commander of their squad. It was Elizabeth who said that she was ordering them to destroy the monsters and protect the civilians, and that this was the most important task. The situation was urgent, so all questions should be left for later. The subordinate said he had no questions. Suddenly, the girl looked to the side and saw a strange situation there. A guy was trying to break through to the roof and said that he wanted to do the same, so he asked them to move aside. The commander said they were in a hurry, so she told him to get in quickly. Jason shouted for the lady to let him go with them because he also wanted to help, but those who were holding him back said he couldn't do that. The girl looked at him in surprise and asked if he was really Mr. Jason. The hero said that he would go too, and if he couldn't fight the monsters, he could evacuate the citizens, because in such a situation, any help would be useful. The commander looked at him carefully, assessing the situation, and agreed. That is why the hunter's ship soon took to the sky and headed for the scene of the incident. Elizabeth said that he had managed to save his comrade in the dungeon and from the giant spider, and now he wanted to help evacuate civilians, which was commendable. Jason smiled and thought that, in fact, he was pursuing his own goals. The man asked if it wasn't strange that only 3 weeks had passed since the Rainbow Bridge breach had been closed. The commander noted that anything could happen in their world, including another dungeon breach. And no matter how many times it happened, they would go to the epicenter every time to prevent a repeat of the disaster that had occurred 15 years ago. After these words, those present covered their mouths, and everyone remembered what had happened then. The hero thought that he remembered these events as if they had happened yesterday. It was then that simultaneous dungeon breaches occurred around the world. They call what happened an international disaster, which occurs when not enough monsters are exterminated in the dungeon. In such cases, the dungeons become overcrowded and collapse, forming a breach, and then the monsters break out, attacking peaceful residents. It was in this very chaos that the main character's parents died. He has never told anyone about this, and no one would believe him anyway. But at that moment, a supernatural creature from another dimension appeared and gave him what seemed at the time to be a curse. Naturally, the boy was very frightened when this happened. The creature called it a gift and set a time limit of 20 years. Of course, the boy doesn't know if this means the duration of his abilities or his life, but the hourglass of the curse continues to run even now. Remembering what had happened, Jason also thought about his time limit. Thoughts also came to his mind that the creature had appeared during a great catastrophe. So when it reappears, another cataclysm will occur, and there are only 5 years left until then. The boy realized that he needed to develop his abilities, become the strongest hunter, and perhaps he would be able to prevent the catastrophe and lift the curse. But to do that, he desperately needed the blade of the Carissian dragon. Meanwhile, explosions could be heard on the Rainbow Bridge. Peaceful residents abandoned their cars and began to flee from the monsters that had appeared from the breach. Naturally, hunters arrived at the scene and tried to fight them. The boy watched and thought that there were too few of them, and that they would not be able to protect all the civilians. At that moment, a goblin appeared behind him and tried to attack him. But the man noticed it and easily killed it, cutting it into several pieces. Although the attacks on him did not stop at that moment, because there were a huge number of monsters, and they attacked. Since the guy didn't have time to react to this attack, a man from the side helped him. He turned to the young man and told him not to count crows while fighting. The young man smiled in response and expressed his gratitude. The older hunter said that if he relaxed again, he shouldn't expect any help. Roger understood that he was not shy about expressing himself and called him a sidekick. However, it was the elder who saved him from the orc, and today was the second time he had come to his rescue. Therefore, the young man was determined to repay his debt. The man noticed that he seemed to have lost a lot of blood and was feeling nauseous. Roger asked, by the way, if there was any news about reinforcements, and his interlocutor replied that due to magnetic waves in the dungeon, they could not contact them. But they surely already know about the situation and are heading there, so people should run to the beginning of the bridge. In that case, they would meet up with reinforcements faster, the guy asked. Really there? The senior replied, it doesn't matter. It's definitely better than dying here. That's why he should keep up and follow him. A huge monster attacked the van. This creature was level 190 and was called the Bear King. George asked the girl if she was sure everything would be okay, and Lucy replied that she understood his concern. But at the same time, she asked him not to worry too much, because her defensive magic was at the highest level, so even a level 400 bridge couldn't scratch it. At that very moment, the bridge they were standing on began to gradually collapse. Lucy said that things were bad, because even the strongest defensive magic couldn't protect them from this. Roger was also terrified and asked what the hell was going on. The association's ships were already very close and were preparing to land. Suddenly, one of the pilots looked ahead and immediately shouted to the commander that there was something ahead. This piqued the girl's interest, and she naturally looked in that direction. The guy started saying that it was the boss of the Rainbow Bridge dungeon, and his name was Quisha. Elizabeth was terrified when she saw him and shouted for everyone to prepare for impact. The huge monster opened its equally huge mouth and prepared to attack with magic. So, after a very short time, everything in the path of this beam was destroyed. The bridge in front of it collapsed under the pressure of this creature. Jason wondered if this thing had destroyed the bridge. This was bad, because he was counting on his long sword to be intact. The dungeon boss looked at the other ships in the sky and sensed a threat from them. So he opened his mouth again and prepared to attack them. A few moments later, a magical beam began to strike these ships, as well as the bridge. Therefore, the hunters, led by their commander, began to jump out of the damaged ship. Elizabeth landed and told everyone to listen to her, saying that they were changing their plan and that all forces should focus on destroying Kishi. Everyone immediately agreed to this, but the girl wondered where Mr. Jason was. After that, she smiled sweetly and was sure that he was all right, because right now, she had a strong feeling that he would not die just like that. She prepared to attack with her magic and immediately used Hellfire. It was directed at the dungeon boss. The hero realized that this was only the second time he had seen it, but it was truly impressive and would have to be copied later. Jason landed somewhere nearby and the system chose to untangle the great spider's web. The guy thought that his main task now was to copy the long sword of the Corisian dragon. A group of masked people moved forward, and the commander was told that Key's appearance was unexpected, and one wrong move could put them in danger too. The commander said that, on the contrary, this was advantageous, because the hunter, Elizabeth, and the others from the association would be busy for a while. Destroying the boss was a quick way to collapse the breakthrough. And during this time, they would not take the long sword of the Carisi dragon. They should move quietly so as not to encounter monsters. The main character moved forward, and saw that there were many dead monsters there, obviously the work of hunters. The only problem was that these creatures usually acted in secret, and he had a bad feeling about it. Suddenly, he heard a man shouting at him to run away immediately. Roger continued to fight these wolves and said that he would not run away because he could handle such monsters. The older man was wounded and told him to listen to him, because he needed to run, otherwise they would both be dead. His companion asked how he could abandon him. Jason thought that these were hunters who controlled the entrance to the dungeon, and one of them was wounded. He decided that he couldn't get distracted and needed to focus on his goal, and that they would manage somehow on their own. The man shouted to his companion that he didn't know. Why were these low-ranking dogs in such a difficult dungeon when they gathered in packs, their power equivalent to that of high-level creatures? And if he saw several such creatures, then everything was already very bad, and all because there were so many of them in that case. These were nasty level 15 monster wolves. They were usually low-level, but they gathered in packs of 20 or 30. Roger was determined to fight and said he didn't care. All this was because the Elder had received all these wounds because of him, and now it was his turn to protect him. When the main character heard this, he immediately stopped and turned his attention there. Then he thought about how he had saved David, and asked him to hold on, because they needed to get out of there. The monsters began to close in, sensing the smell of their prey. The bravest of them immediately rushed to attack the man with the weapon. But of course, the guy noticed the attack and easily cut off its head. Next, a monster that had been standing aside and saw the open area attacked. Roger also noticed this attack, so he used his weapon to block it. Then he did a little pirouette and plunged his blade into the monster's neck. Now the man attacked the monster behind him. The guy felt this attack and realized that he would not be able to dodge it in time. At the same time, the main character came to his aid and pushed the animal away with his shoulder. It turned out to be a pretty strong attack, and the wolf was killed. Jason turned to the stranger and asked if he was all right. The stranger said that he was fine, but not for long, because there were still many of them there. Indeed, the creatures kept coming and coming. Roger thanked him for his help and told him to run away quickly. All this because even high-level hunters would not be able to cope with such a huge pack. The main character stood in front and smiled, saying that it was great. Roger asked in surprise what he was carrying. Jason took advantage of the system and decided to put them up for auction a little later. The wolves spotted their new prey and prepared to attack him. At that moment, the guy was thinking about what would happen if he combined the great spider's rod with his skill. He had always been curious about how effective it would be against a large group of monsters. Roger saw several creatures rush at the guy and thought they had already torn him to pieces. But it wasn't that simple, because the system said that the great spider's rod had been used with the second skill option. Only because of this did a large amount of web appear, enveloping everything around. The wolves that attacked the hero were bound and could not move. All this happened to new victims who were dragged somewhere. During this experimental action, the all waves were bound together. The system informed Jason that the level had been raised, and he noticed that simple binding did not provide a significant level increase. However, as expected, the technique worked perfectly against the pack, but he needed to find a way to attack after binding them. Roger thought he had neutralized the entire pack at once, What kind of skill could this be? It must be something high level. The man thanked him for his help and asked if he was a reinforcement from the association. The guy replied that he was right and thought that they had arrived in the same helicopter, so he wasn't lying. His interlocutor said that in that case, he would like him to take his partner with him. Roger shouted that it wasn't necessary, because he wouldn't abandon him even at the cost of his own life. The older man replied that he would be safe with this person. Jason was surprised at how loyal this man was, because he shouted that he would not leave alone under any circumstances. The hero thought that in any case, in such a state, they were both in danger. It was a pity, of course, but there was no other way out, and besides, it was only a copy. So he ordered the inventory to open, and took out a bottle, then handed it to him and told him to take it. The man said that it was the same thing, but the guy continued that it was a medium-level potion, and he wouldn't be able to fight, but he would definitely be able to stand on his feet. The elder asked why he was giving him such a valuable item. The hero smiled and said that his partner would definitely not return home without it. Roger was very inspired by his speech and thought how cool he was. So he expressed his immense gratitude and said that his name was Roger Satoru, and that he controlled the entrance to the dungeon, asking him to at least remember his name, because he promised to repay him for everything in the future. The hero asked if he could ask for his help. He was looking for the International Hunters Association van and wondered if they could tell him where it was, because he was simply directionally challenged. The guy was surprised by what he heard and asked if a hunter really couldn't find his way around. At about the same time, the King of Bears continued to rage and destroy everything around him. But after Lucy used her magic on him, he immediately fell to the ground. George asked if she had simply put him to sleep, even though he was a hunter, and that he was a pacifist, which was impressive. At the same time, a metal ball flew towards them, but it was cut into several pieces. This was because the man had noticed it, and easily destroyed the rest of the weapons. Then he smiled and said that he knew someone would take advantage of the chaos to steal the sword. So did they really think they were the first to think of it? And after that, he asked these cowards to come out, and the girl saw who it was, and was very surprised. The leader of these people came out and said that their insight was simply impressive, and in that case, they would see what these people were capable of. Immediately after saying this, he rushed into the attack. The first to take the blow was George, who easily blocked the attack with his sword. When he did so, he said that they should not be underestimated, for they were the escorts of a legendary weapon. Therefore, they should not think that it would be so easy to deal with them. His opponent then began to run away, and the man shouted for him to stop, and chased after him. Lucy realized it was a trap and shouted at him not to run there, but it was already too late, because the man felt that something was wrong with his body. He immediately fell to his knees and blood gushed from his mouth. His ally was worried about him and ran closer, but the man did not understand what was happening to him. Lucy shouted that they had sprayed a poison that causes damage and blocks mana absorption for a while, so if he continued to fight, it would kill him. The captain of the attackers said that this mage had good intuition, that they had underestimated them, and that this was just their usual way of working. Her companion noted that it was still a common practice to use poison against people, despite the association's ban. If that was the case, then fine. She would make them regret what they had done 100 times over, maybe even 1,000. The enemy wizard used fire and said that since the mage was unable to use mana, she was going to do it, and that she should stop singing her praises and just let her die. But the long sword would definitely belong to them, because at the moment when the man tried to attack her, his head flew off his shoulders. The attackers did not understand what was happening, and saw the animal rise. In addition to the bears, the same time came to its senses, and prepared to attack these people. Due to its enormous size and ferocity, they could do nothing against it, and therefore fell victim. The animal knocked its opponents off their feet and threw them in different directions. Then, showing them no mercy, it finished them off with its own huge limbs. The enemy captain realized that it was the girl who had done this and shouted that she was a scoundrel. It turned out that the bear was not dead, and she had only put it to sleep, so they had to retreat. The rest were already dead and torn to pieces, and the animal headed towards the other people, and the girl realized that now it was their turn. George wondered if she would just try to put it to sleep again. His companion asked if he had forgotten that she couldn't absorb mana right now, and her comrade said he knew that her pacifism would one day turn against them. It seemed that his bet had finally paid off today. The girl replied that this was indeed the case, but he didn't have to die because of his own fault. Immediately after these words, she moved forward to fight. Several magic circles appeared in her hands, which she intended to use to attack. Her partner noticed what was happening and asked what she was doing, but Lucy, in turn, did not stop and continued to run straight towards her opponent. Of course, due to the use of mana, her body was negatively affected by poison. As she had expected, absorbing mana completely blocked her abilities. The Bear King saw that his prey was heading straight for him and immediately tried to attack her. Lucy realized that there was nothing she could do, so she mentally changed in front of her partner. But what she saw before her eyes stunned her, because the hero used his skill. A web appeared in front of the bear and began to spread around. It also touched the bear's huge limbs, clinging to them. Soon, its body was almost completely enveloped in the web, which bound it. The creature couldn't understand what was happening and screamed loudly, but nothing could be done about it, and soon it fell to the ground. After what happened to it, the main character approached it and stopped near its snout. Roger said that it was just wonderful, because he had caught the king of bears in one fell swoop, and that was impressive. The hero thought that he himself was in shock, because he did not think he would succeed. The boy called Jason Sr. again and said that he was really cool. Jason asked why he called him that, since they were almost the same age. His companion pointed out that he and the man had saved his life, so he should respect and honor them both. The hero thought that now he would not be able to get rid of this man. He then turned to the conveyors and asked if they were all right, since they were from the International Association. After what had happened, Lucy was very surprised, so she stood there and said nothing. George stood up and asked if they had also come for the sword. Jason replied that this was not the case. They had come for Togo to help protect him. The man replied only that they had been attacked by a group of robbers, and why should they believe them now? The guy looked to the side and realized that these corpses had come for the longsword, but had been killed by the Bear King. But now it was unclear what to do because it seemed like he was about to attack. The man stood there with a very suspicious look on his face, staring intently at these people. Roger shouted, "Is this how you thank your saviors?" He risked his life for them, and they call him a robber. This man is a hunter from the Japanese Association. He and his senior were the controllers of this dungeon, and the hero thought he had arrived just in time. That's why all he had to do was season everything with creme fraiche sauce, so he quietly told them to open their inventory. Then he took out a medium-level potion and said that they hadn't drunk it yet, as it was something similar to their wounds, which were quite serious. He thought he would do everything he could to get the sword of the Carissian dragon, and that this investment would pay off handsomely. So he told them not to be shy and just drink the potion, so the escorts took it in their hands. Lucy looked at the mixture in her hands with considerable suspicion. Then she turned her attention to the King of the Bears, who was very angry but could do nothing about it. At the same time, the Blue Ones appeared, along with helicopters and planes from the Hunters Association. The man said that he thought the cavalry had arrived, and Roger asked if that meant they would soon be rescued. His companion replied that he wasn't sure, because something seemed wrong here. Something was happening, and these guys had a completely different task. At about the same time, Elizabeth was fighting the king of the dungeon on the bridge. Soon, she shouted to stop the attack because the creature had entered its third phase, and would be striking in all directions. It turned out that the support guild had arrived, so they needed to buy time until the evacuation of civilians was complete. The others shouted that they understood. Suddenly, someone asked her if she really thought this would stop the breakthrough into the dungeon. He then smiled and said that they hadn't seen this lady in a long time. The girl noticed the man and realized that he was Ricardo Masato, a hunter, as well as a level 503 dark mage and the future head of the guild. Elizabeth looked at him in surprise and asked what he was doing there. Her companion replied that he didn't understand why she was asking such a silly question. The girl asked if he really wanted to do what she was thinking. Indeed, the man used his magic, and a huge magic circle appeared in front of the boss of this dungeon. Elizabeth shouted to stop immediately, because if he couldn't defeat it with this spell, everything would be bad. Ricardo said that worrying about such trifles would get him nowhere. Last time, when sealing the dungeon on the Rainbow Bridge, there was an association, and she was there too. Together they had done almost everything, and this time he would not stand aside, so this was his prey, and he would take everything for himself, so he used the dark lightning skill. The girl realized what was about to happen, so she shouted to everyone else to run away from there immediately. And the power that the dark mage used had already begun to spread throughout the area and affect people. The dungeon boss was struck by this obvious force and immediately fell to the ground. As the monster fell, its body broke through the bridge, leaving a huge gap in it. The main character, in turn, managed to hold on with his hand. Then, using his strength, he climbed up and thought that it was the end for him, but everything was fine. After he came to his senses a little, he looked to the side. There he saw the other people he had knocked out with his strength, as well as the van, and thought that everything was fine, because the van was intact, and so were everyone else. Then something huge caught his attention to the side, because now he was right next to the huge boss of the dungeon. Jason was very surprised when he realized that it was Keisha. It was unclear how he got there. Was he dead, or had he been captured? At the same time, a dark mage appeared and said, "Are there really any survivors here?" It seemed that this man was a low-level hunter, which was commendable. Jason looked at him closely and realized that he had seen this symbol somewhere before, and that this was the third most powerful guild in the country of the future. The guy said he seemed to be from a support guild, But shouldn't saving citizens and destroying monsters be his priority? The man asked what he was, saying rescue. Once, and destroying monsters is strange. Let him look. It seems that all the citizens have already been evacuated. But it seems that he can still hear someone, and it's not Keisha. As it turns out, it was the Bear King who was tied up. Ricardo touched the web and asked what it was, wondering if it was the web of a giant spider, not even knowing that it could be used that way. At that very moment, the web that bound the huge creature began to crumble. The King of Bears was destroyed with just one touch from the Dark Mage, and the hero realized that he had broken the web with a snap of his fingers. And it, in turn, was able to hold back a level 200 monster and a 25-ton truck, and even turned the bear into mincemeat. Could it be that the boss of the Rainbow Bridge dungeon was also his doing? The hero immediately turned his attention to his system, because he saw some messages. There, in turn, it said that several dozen levels had been raised, and the system also reported that it was not possible to obtain an item for defeating the Bear King. Ricardo asked what else it was. Was it the sound of a level increase? Was it for the weak monster he had caught? He apologized because it seemed that he had stolen his prey, the spiderweb, and he didn't think that the bear cub was his doing, so he accidentally delivered the final blow and took the reward. Then he threw it away and said to keep the Bear King's claws for himself. He didn't need them, so let them take them, because they didn't like to take what belonged to others. The main character looked at him coldly and then said to listen carefully. But suddenly Elizabeth appeared and asked if it was really Mr. Jason, and the guy also noticed her. The girl immediately thought about how everything would turn out the way she had imagined. Ricardo asked if they knew each other, which meant that he was also from the association, and now he understood why he didn't like him at first. Elizabeth asked what had happened, and the guy replied that it was nothing special. Then she noticed that the support team was evacuating citizens. Let the guy go with them, because if Quisha wakes up, he'll start rampaging. The hero asked if there was a way to kill him. His companion sadly said that, unfortunately, this was impossible, understanding that monster bosses activate rage when their health falls below 33%. Or else, an area attack happens instantly. In both cases, they attack in different directions, and weak mini-bosses usually only activate rage. This requires less concentration without the need to divide the battle into phases. But such strong bosses have a very large amount of health, and activate 2 attacks. Therefore, their fight is divided into phases. In the third phase, Quisha, sensing a threat to his life, carries out large-scale destructive attacks capable of destroying everything around him. He is currently in the third phase and protects himself with a barrier, absorbing mana from the environment at this time, making any attacks useless. Elizabeth shouted that everything was bad because he woke up earlier than they expected. The man said it was just in time before he started unleashing massive attacks. So, he was going to turn him into a pile of rewards after using his abilities. The girl told Jason that she believed he would be able to get out alive this time, and Ricardo noted that it was unlikely that such a weakling would survive this battle. In any case, if she's lying, I should blame them for the higher mortality rate of low-ranking hunters than in traffic accidents. When the guild leader said this, he immediately rushed into the attack, using his powers. The hero picked up the reward for the Bear King and realized that it was the future guild leader. At the same time, he thought that he wasn't going to do all this, but he would kill Quesh first. So he was going to mix this man with feces, and he would see it in the future. Soon Roger asked if Jason had saved him again. Lucy was in a bad mood again, and looked at the web suspiciously. The guy turned to the guards and said he had a request for them. The dungeon boss had entered the third phase, and would soon begin to rage. With his attack, there would be nothing left standing here. That's why it would be difficult to find the van and the longsword they had brought with them. So the main character is going to kill Keish, but to do that, he needs the longsword of the Carizian dragon. In the end, the guy will return it immediately after defeating the monster. George shouted, wondering if he would have enough strength to take down an entire dragon. Of course, he helped them twice, but that doesn't mean they'll trust him. Does the guy even know what condition the sword is in? The girl said it was impossible, and the hero realized that at this rate, the sword would be lost to him forever. Lucy said that a huge amount of mana was needed to remove the seal on the van, and because of the robber's poison, they couldn't absorb mana. His companion turned to her and asked what she was doing. Jason noticed that they hadn't told him about this problem before. He smiled and said that his nickname was Mononos, and one of his skills was infinite mana regeneration. Soon, the girl's body was filled with enormous strength, and she thought it was impossible because mana was arriving. Therefore, she could use her magic quite easily, and soon the seal was removed. The hero thanked her for everything and said that he would keep his promise and return the sword. George asked why his partner had done this, and what if he decided to do something bad. Lucy replied that everything was fine, as he had recently bound the Bear King but had not killed him. His partner asked if that was the only reason she believed him, and couldn't have lied, at least for the sake of propriety. The hero quickly made his way to the van and opened the back door. When he looked inside, he was very happy and thought that the long sword of the Corisian dragon was finally in his hands. Suddenly, the captain of the robbers appeared behind him and said that the operation had almost failed, but he was glad he had decided to see how it would end. The hero did not understand what the hell was going on, but the man behind him rushed at him with a weapon. Since the distance was very close, Jason did not react and was soon pierced. Roger and the others were surprised that Oshparn had been killed. The guards also noticed what had happened and realized that this man was a scoundrel and that he was still alive. The enemy captain immediately jumped into the van and prepared to steal his weapon. He even said who would have thought that the ball would go to him in this way. At that very moment, the system reported that due to the death of its owner, the web of the great spider was breaking. That is why the van, which had been on the web all this time, immediately began to fall down. And when it fell, it began to slowly sink deeper and deeper into the water. Jason appeared behind the robber and said that he had the same feeling because he didn't think he would get the sword this way. After that, the guy used the weapon and immediately stabbed the man in front of him. At the same time, he said that all the good and evil that was done to him, he would return twice over. After that, the hero drew his weapon, and the man in front of him fell, bleeding profusely. Then he began to laugh and said that the enemy captain had been wrong to covet his prize. And finally, the sword of the Corisian dragon, which he had dreamed of so much, belonged to him. The first thing the system asked was whether to copy the dragon's longsword. The hero shouted, "Of course, it must be done," and pressed the button at that very moment. But at that moment, the system reported that copying was impossible, because the user's level did not match the required level of the object. The guy was terrified and didn't understand what was going on. To use the longsword, you needed to be at least level 30 higher, and his level had long since exceeded 50. He then said that he didn't want this weapon to anger him, and heard a voice behind him saying that it looked like he had lost. "It's nothing personal, but the honor of the Blood Tower killer is at stake." After these words, he struck his opponent. After such a powerful blow, the hero's body immediately fell to the ground, powerless. The enemy captain then said that if it weren't for his healing skill, he would have died long ago. After that, he approached the guy and said that he would return his own words to him. Because he quickly forgets the good he does, he returns it threefold, and let him in turn accept death from his blade. And after that, he would never see the dawn again. The hero felt intense pain from the weapon in his back and realized that he had struggled to get here. Suddenly, the system reported that the long sword of the Carcian dragon had merged with the user. Next came the copying and absorption of the characteristics of this weapon, capable of a dragon. The main character was still conscious at that moment and saw the absorption, but did not understand what was happening. Then he saw in the system window that the long sword's level had been copied and absorbed. This was followed by the copying and absorption of the weapon's passive skill, after which the defense was increased by 35%. Then there was copying and absorption of the first unique weapon skill called vampirism. Next, the second unique skill of the dragon's sword, called berserk, was absorbed. Very soon, all the characteristics of this weapon were completely absorbed. The system reported that the user's health level had decreased by 25%, and the defense mode of the Corisian dragon long sword users was activated. The second unique skill of this weapon, called berserk, is automatically activated. Copying the second unique skill of the berserk longsword has been inserted. The boss of the Rainbow Bridge dungeon was screaming viciously and preparing to attack. Ricardo noticed that things were bad, because he was about to hit the area and things were bad. The dragon was already in the final stages of launching its attack. Suddenly, she saw something appear below, where the van with weapons was, and in just a few moments, the enormous creature was cut in two. Elizabeth and another high-octane hunter were amazed by this. At that very moment, the system reported that the dungeon boss had been destroyed and the breach sealed. Soon, everyone was at the Hunters Association in Japan. At 4 p.m. today, many civilians were injured as a result of the Rainbow Bridge dungeon breach. Irreparable damage was also caused, but thanks to the prompt actions of the Hunters Association and the Guild, the situation stabilized within 2 hours. However, some are concerned that the association does not control the dungeon well, but the man told the others that there was no need to make such faces. This time, they managed to deal with Quaisha quite successfully, said Georg Tokuo, a tank-class martial arts master of level 570. Simon, the head of the Midas Guild, number 1 in the country with a level of 701, who was a sword master, told the president of the association that 3 months ago they had sealed the breach. Dalton, the head of the Taiken Guild, a healer with a level of 610, said that sealing it did not guarantee that the dungeon would not be disarmed again. The guy asked if it was really necessary to monitor the dungeon so closely that in such a short period of time, when the situation was resolved, it would require an official review of ownership. Elizabeth sat sadly and wondered if Mr. Jason had managed to escape. Simon slammed his fist on the table and said that he was only interested in one thing: Usually, it takes at least 6 months for a boss to revive. But doesn't that mean that Mrs. Elizabeth didn't finish off Quash last time? He continued to stare intently at the girl, and their eyes met. At that moment, she became angry and then touched the table. Then the others saw that she was using her power and didn't understand what was happening. Soon, the pressure on the table became so strong that it began to collapse. Therefore, in a moment, it was destroyed, and the remains flew in different directions. Ricardo sat calmly, protecting himself from them with his aura. The man asked the lady what she was doing and why she was acting so strangely. Simon was also very angry after what he saw and was already preparing his power to attack. Suddenly, he heard someone addressing him politely as, "Sir." It was Georg who apologized for the disrespectful behavior of their employee and offered his apologies on her behalf. The interlocutor was outraged and said that she had completely lost her fear if she continued to provoke him like this, swearing that she would soon die. The girl was even more outraged when she heard these words. She then stood up and said that it was better to see once than hear 100 times. And if they still didn't understand, she showed them the shockwave reward for killing Kwayashi. Mr. Ricardo, who had contributed the most to their recent confrontation, would not let her lie. He noted that he had been too busy and had not yet had time to check the reward, but he did not think she was lying. At that moment, he did not understand why she had dragged him into this. Georg noted that everything was clear, that it was only thanks to Mr. Ricardo that everything had ended with minimal bloodshed. After these words, everyone began to applaud and thank him for his work, but he asked them not to. Then he turned his attention to the girl and wondered if it was really true. She, in turn, smiled slyly, and it was clear that she was satisfied with the situation. The man thought that this scoundrel was harboring resentment because he had intervened. So the girl would pay for this, because he would not forgive such humiliation, and he would definitely find the scoundrel who stole Quesh from him. Elizabeth said she would take responsibility for finding out the cause of the subway breakdown. In addition, she would also seek accountability from the guild for the delay. Those present immediately lowered their heads, realizing that reinforcements would be a long time coming. The girl said that it seemed that all questions to her had been exhausted, and that she would take her leave. Then the door opened and George appeared, saying that everything was fine and the meeting was not over yet. He had come on behalf of the International Association and Hunters, and he had important information to convey to everyone present. Due to a recent break-in, the world's only long sword of the Karisi dragon had been stolen during transport. The sword was on its way to an exhibition in Japan, and everyone was asked to actively participate in the search. There was an official letter from the International Association requesting assistance. Simon noted that when the van was attacked, he heard that they had removed the seal themselves, and Lucy noted that this was done at the request of Hunter Roger. He was an employee of the Taiken Guild and Hunter Jason from the Japanese Hunters Association. Georg and Elizabeth were very surprised when they heard this information. Even Ricardo, who took note of the information, was greatly surprised by all this. Dalton noted that Roger was indeed one of her people, but it wasn't that simple. Georg looked at his device and said that there was no hunter named Jason Haruto in the Japanese Association. Elizabeth realized that the situation was taking a turn for the worse, because she was the one who had taken him on the mission. The man looked at her and realized that this was his chance for revenge. So he asked them to wait, wondering if they meant the one who tied the king bear with a web. They had a minor disagreement on the spot, but he was surprised because he also thought he was from the association. So he asked Miss Elizabeth how to understand this, because it seemed that she knew him. So they asked if it was really him who stole the long sword of the Carisian dragon. At that moment, the man took the weapon into his own hands. But it was not the main character, but Michael Takumi, the head of the Dark Guild Bloody Tower with a level of 301. He declared that it was the legendary blade, and simply took it in his hands. The level will increase by 200, and the runes on the hilt help to recognize the owner. The billions spent on organizing the breakthrough of this dungeon were worth it, and it was delightful. His subordinates were stunned, and wondered if it was true that the leader had really made a breakthrough. The leader said that this man had lost all his fighters, and asked if he wanted to explain himself. He immediately bowed and apologized, saying that some strange man had followed them, but there was no need to worry because he was surely dead. The man covered his mouth for a few moments, then said that everything was clear and that it was a good job. It turned out that the corpses no longer needed the money, so their share would belong to him as his reward, and now he could count it. The guy thanked the master and said that now the task could be considered complete. But Michael said that wasn't the case, because he had failed, and his interlocutor asked what that meant. The boss asked who would sell the world's only legendary sword for only 10 billion, since he had taken on this task to get information about it. The subordinate said to wait a second, because failure of the task meant death for their guild. Then the master got involved, who was simply a scoundrel, because he had planned to kill him from the very beginning. Michael used his power and said that it was nothing personal, but he didn't need any witnesses, and besides, he hoped that Karen accepted Yen. The glass behind the man cracked a few moments later, and very soon a subordinate appeared on it who was killed. Michael's next action was to cut the man into several pieces, and the system reported that the weapon's durability had decreased by 2, and there were 8 left. The man realized that it would be quite annoying if it broke before he had a chance to repair it. The main character remembered the words of the man who told him to remember, because it was his gift to him. Immediately after that, he woke up and started screaming quite loudly. The timer that was built into his neck was glowing, and he could feel it. Then he touched the mark on his neck and said that everything was bad, that honest words had done their job. Roger called him senior and said that he had woken up, but he thought that he would never come to his senses again. The guy didn't understand why and asked him to stop. His companion said that wasn't true, that after he was wounded from the sea, a dazzling pillar of light burst forth, very bright. The man asked if he was really in the center of the Rainbow Bridge underground, and the guy replied that it was true. They were there with him, and everyone else with the elder. The hero rose from his seat, and his interlocutors continued their conversation. So he went in some other direction and said that his head was spinning from his energy. The man noticed that it was this very person who had saved his life, and Jason asked what he meant and how it had happened. The man replied that he considered it his duty, and that this kid had put everyone on alert, taken, and the association had to pay the price. In the end, he was found on the coast, and the hero wondered if some kind of dungeon controller had forced the guild and the association to move. The head of Taiken is Dalton Sonoda, and this guy is Roger Sonoda, so are they really not related? The guy couldn't believe his own thoughts and thought it was nonsense because they weren't in some kind of movie. The conversation continued in the office of the chairman of the Hunters Association. Elizabeth said that she understood everything, meaning that the hunter Jason had died after all, and the man replied that it was so, that he had seen his death with his own eyes. But now it seemed to him that the girl was not surprised at all, and he couldn't understand why she was reacting so strangely. His conversation partner noted that the work of hunters always carries risks. The man was surprised again, and Georg said that he had seen their official letter requesting cooperation. Their participation in this case as the Japanese Hunters Association had been confirmed, so they would do everything possible to help in the search for the legendary sword. Lucy remarked that in that case, they should provide several high-level hunters, since they knew where the sword was located. The interlocutor said that he had, of course, expected something like this, but had they already established its location? It was magic for tracking the opposition. In response, he heard that this sword was not a personal item, but it had runes engraved on it that allowed the owner's level to be assessed. She could sense this engraving and track it. About an hour ago, someone had used it again. Elizabeth thought that they had not been told that the engraving could be sensed. She could also track it, and that was why Jason had been given permission to use it. The girl said that before it was stolen, it had a durability of about 10. But someone had used it and the durability had decreased. The interlocutor said that soon it would disappear. It was the only clue to finding her mother. This refers to the woman who disappeared during this incident 15 years ago. Lucy asked how she knew this. Elizabeth replied that they weren't stupid either, and that they knew the stolen longsword was her mother's heirloom. The girl immediately stood up when she heard this information. She then bowed and asked Mrs. Elizabeth to help her recover her mother's heirloom. When the conversation ended, the girl walked down the corridor and thought that Lucy and George were hiding something. The story with Mr. Jason also aroused her suspicion, because she did not think that he would die in this incident. Her thoughts were interrupted by a man who addressed her. It was Dalton who asked if something was upsetting her, or if something had happened. She replied that everything was fine, and asked if he had business with her. The guild leader asked why she didn't return to Taiken. The girl sighed sadly, and said that the dungeon was getting bigger and bigger, and instead of protecting them, the big guilds were playing capitalism. All they cared about was damn profits and stock prices on the exchange. If it turns out that the breach was the result of Taiken Guild's negligence, they would be in big trouble. That's exactly why she doesn't want to go back to the association, which has a lot of things that require his attention. She also called this man her father. The man smiled and said that he actually wanted to talk to her about something else, and once again said too much. Before the next trip, he asked her to visit the Central Hunters Hospital, and the main character was actually on the roof of this central hospital. He then called up the status window to check his stats. His health, mana, and basic defense had increased, as had his skill and class levels. Although the guy didn't manage to copy the Corisian dragon's blade, it seems he managed to absorb all of its positive characteristics. Even if he had stolen it, it was unclear how he would have been able to go hunting with it without arousing suspicion, so it was even better that the Rage skill activated at the right time. Rage is the second unique skill of the sword, doubling all characteristics and the user's level, lasting 1 minute, with a recharge time of 1 day. The activation conditions are triggered automatically when the user's health falls below 25%, and right before death, the guy turned into a berserker. It was terribly painful, but thanks to this he managed to tear apart Kuesh. whose level exceeds 400. Soon, the system reported that the monster had been killed, and a reward had been received for its destruction, and the system also absorbed the shockwave by copying it. The copy skill was improved, and Quasha's shockwave was absorbed and turned into the internal vibration skill. The shockwave was also absorbed into the insertion skill and turned into internal vibration. The Great Spider's web drips water at level 2, so when the web is used, the unique wave and vampirism are activated simultaneously. While all this was happening, the main character continued to sink deeper and deeper into the water. Jason thought that the copying skill had evolved, and now it was possible to absorb even drain abilities, so that was just awesome. He had just tried using the internal vibration skill, and it was really cool. Plus, he was now at level 276. In the end, all he had to do was find the one who wounded him and get the legendary weapon. Suddenly, he heard a voice asking why she was hitting him. The guy didn't understand what had happened, but it piqued his interest. It was Elizabeth, who said that she had warned him that if it was dangerous, he should immediately drop and run. Jason understood, and thought that she could be so harsh. He wondered who was so unlucky and what she needed in this hospital. Roger called her a little sister and said that it was her own fault for not being able to seal the dungeon completely. She asked if he was really a fool. The hero was horrified and thought, what other sister? Although it was true, because they were both synods. Then he remembered his interlocutor, who said that they had raised the guild and the association, so they had a hard time. The guy thought it was just a coincidence, but could they really be brother and sister? The girl asked if Mr. Jason was also okay and where he was now, but the interlocutor said he didn't know. The hero realized that they were looking for him, but did they find out that he pretended to be a hunter of the association in order to steal weapons? This was bad. He couldn't let them find him. In that case, he had to get to the legendary blade first. And just as he was about to run away from this place, he bumped into someone. It turned out to be George, who said that he had survived after all. Then he looked at the boy quite angrily and called him a thief of legendary swords. The boy was stunned when he saw this man and realized that he had been caught. Without hesitation, the man grabbed him by his clothes and called him a scoundrel. Then he hit him hard against the wall and told him to tell him where the sword was, because if he didn't, he would smash him into the wall. Jason tried to say, "Wait a second, this is a misunderstanding." The guard asked what misunderstanding had killed him, but now he looked perfectly healthy. So was he really in cahoots with those people? The main character realized that the situation was such that the guard didn't want to listen to him at all, and things were looking bad. George immediately used his power and took out his sword. Then Lucy yelled at him, asking why he had drawn his weapon in the hospital, and he told her not to worry, because he wasn't going to use it. It's just that if he doesn't make this liar come true, he won't be able to calm down. The main character thought that he really didn't want to resort to this, but there was nothing he could do, and his inner vibration ability was activated. The blade was already heading towards the guy, and he also reached out to him with his hand, but before the blade could even touch him, it began to fall apart. George saw what had happened and was shocked that his weapon had been destroyed. Roger and Elizabeth also approached, looking surprised. The girl carefully examined what had happened and wondered if it was really a shockwave from Keish, but it was unclear where it had come from in Jason. In addition, it was completely incomprehensible why his aura had changed so dramatically. The concert hall was very loud, and a fairly popular band was performing there. The band consisted of girls who were energetically moving around on stage. The crowd cheered when they heard their songs, and soon the concert came to an end. Sarah got into the car, and she was a member of the idol group IF. There, she said goodbye to the other girls and told them they had done a great job. Immediately after that, she started the engine of her car and drove away. One of the girls asked if Sarah's parents were rich, and her friend replied that how else could she explain driving such a fancy car? Another member said that it was very cool, and that she also wanted to drive a sports car like that. When the girl was almost out of the parking lot, she saw another car in front of her. She stopped quite abruptly because of this, as she almost had an accident. Fortunately, she managed to do so and avoided a collision. Angry, Sarah opened the window and shouted at the driver to ask who taught him to drive. At that moment, the driver opened the door and slowly began to get out of the car. It turned out to be Michael, the leader of the Bloody Night Guild. Her companion noticed him and realized who he was. The man approached her car and threw a case with a legendary weapon inside. Then he approached the woman and asked if the filming was over. If so, would she like to go down to the dungeon? That is, if she wanted everything to remain as it was before. The main character and the Steel Ones arrived at the place where the long sword of the Carizian dragon was used. After examining it, Elizabeth said that there were no traces left, and Lucy added that it seemed they were too late. The hunter said that meant all they could do was wait until the sword was used again. After these words, there was an awkward pause, and the girls began to think about it. Suddenly, the hero drew attention to himself and said that there was a bloody tower there, which happened at the moment when the villain was trying to kill him. He said that the Bloody Tower was from the guild, and the girl said that she had never heard of such a guild, and that it was probably one of the dark ones. Jason said he understood and even he didn't know about it. George noted that if they waited for the next application, the sword might break. Elizabeth shouted that there was no need, because they had a lead and would now work on it, and she, in turn, knew someone who could help them. It was exactly 15 years ago that the terrible disaster happened, which took many lives, and at that very moment, a certain creature had given the girl this power. At first, she thought she had awakened as a hunter, but it was a completely different ability. The skill that the system suggested the girl use could return an object to its original state. Her skill was a combination of keys on a computer that allowed her to restore everything to its original state, and this ability could be used on both people and objects. So she bought broken or discarded items that were valuable to her, restored them to their original state, and sold them. Although it could not be called a healing or restoration ability, she earned money by returning people and their body parts to their original state. As a result, it turns out that there were limitations to this ability. But she needed money, and a lot of it, because her parents had suffered during a great disaster and currency crisis. The little girl tried to return them to their previous state, but she needed mana to use this ability. Without it, she could only roll back objects and minor injuries. Mana is a kind of energy that is only available to hunters. Then the girl, risking her life, went to the dungeon to get mana there, and she did it as a porter. But sometimes she healed wounds, and so she was a healer. For an ordinary person who was not a hunter, going into the dungeon was as dangerous as entering a lion's cage unarmed. But it's funny that she suffered the most damage from the contempt of her fellow party members, who asked her if she really wanted mana like some kind of beggar. Of course, there were also more terrible moments when the girl lost her companions. It seemed to her that this ability only caused problems, so she wanted to give it all up. Suddenly, a man approached her and remarked that it was all very interesting. Not only was she begging for mana like a homeless person, but she also started stealing, and that's when she met Michael Kurosaki. The man said that her house was so empty, and he didn't understand what she was spending her money on. Could it be that Sarah, from a popular Japanese group, was living like a hermit, eating 3 meals a day, ordering fast food delivery? Who would have thought that an idol could afford such a lifestyle? He smiled and said again that her life was a success, while everyone else was trying their best and dieting. But Sarah doesn't care how much she eats, because she can get back to her previous state. But he immediately understood what kind of person she was when he met her that very day, with a man dying in front of her, and she was stealing from him. So he can say that they are two of a kind. Of course, the girls didn't like these comments at all. The man said that he would make it clear right away that if their agreement continued, he didn't care what she did, even if it concerned her work as an idol. The girl got tired of listening to him and slammed her hand on the table, asking what it was this time. She doesn't understand why she has to go to the dungeon. Let him gather mana as usual and give it to her. Michael said he needed her help to restore one trinket to its original state, but that would require a huge amount of mana. But he can't get it here, and he swears that this will be the last time she has to go down into the dungeon. His companion asked if he was serious, and the man replied that it was true, because he had promised her. Sarah asked if he had found the item of infinite mana regeneration, and if it was in that dungeon. Michael replied that this was not the case, and the girl asked what he was talking about. Michael replied that if she went with him, it might appear, knowing that they had an agreement not to go into the dungeon. But if she went down with him, then yes, he promised to make it up to her. The hero was in the Belgium of the future and noticed that if they were talking about an informant, it must be Mr. Ricardo. He was the head of that very guild who constantly complained that everyone around him was getting in his way. The girl replied that he was right. The guy asked if it wouldn't be better to seek information from the largest guilds, Midas or Tychon. Elizabeth said that perhaps so, in terms of information about dungeons and manifestations, they are the leaders in the world, which she and the entire association acknowledge. But his desire to clear the dungeon was greater than anyone else's, and now he was heading towards the future guild leader, Ricardo. The girl wondered if he was talking about the heart of a giant golem. Her companion noted that this was correct, and that it was also called the object of infinite mana regeneration. Elizabeth said that it was a rare reward item that appeared when defeating the boss of the secret dungeon Snow Mountain Walked. Ricardo said that this was correct, and that he had not lied in order to find the heart of the giant golem. It was after this that they stumbled upon the very guild, the Bloody Tower, that Mr. Jason had told them about, the existence of which they had not even known. But now it is known that they were secretly recruiting a team to explore the Snow Mountain golems. That is all they have been able to find out so far. But they turned out to be much more dangerous than they had previously thought, involving the murder of high-ranking individuals and the slaughter of entire groups in the dungeons. They also steal items and are ruthless, willing to do anything to achieve their goals. It's a dark guild. The hero realized that he personally did not need this item of infinite mana regeneration, but it was undoubtedly an amazing artifact that anyone would want to get their hands on. But how is the heart connected to the legendary sword? Or was it stolen precisely to defeat this golem, even though the blade is already on its last legs? It is likely that getting the heart for the blood tower is more important than the sword itself, although it all sounds like some kind of nonsense. Elizabeth said that the Bloody Tower Guild found a giant golem and is therefore organizing a raid on this dungeon. Lucy said she doesn't think that's the case at all. 15 years have passed since the discovery of this secret dungeon, and it has never appeared. Jason turned to her and asked where she got this information, and she replied that she couldn't reveal all the details. She, in turn, has long been interested in this dungeon and has been studying it. In any case, the Snow Mountain Golem is known for being difficult to pass through. Among hunters, this dungeon ranks first among those they would prefer to avoid, and sporadic groups set out in search of secret dungeons. But most ignore it. Ricardo wondered if these hired killers could have teamed up to clear the dungeon. Even if it's not a secret dungeon, there's clearly something valuable there, the hero asked. But when they set off, the man replied that he didn't know. The push was already over, so it was unclear. The hero thought about it, as he had thought. It had been planned even before they stole the Carizian dragon sword. Elizabeth noted that in that case, they should go there slowly. She then turned to Mr. Ricardo, and he looked at her. She asked if she understood correctly that he already had a team ready to go, and he replied that he had no reason to do so. The girl said that she believed that the Guild of the Future always kept a team on standby, comparable to those of the association. The head told the lady that she understood that information about secret lands was not always accurate, and that there were good reasons why no one wanted to go there. These reasons included terrible natural conditions and annoying golem lords. On the snowy mountain of golems, there are level 40 stone golems. Their attacks are weak, but there are many of them, and unless their cores are destroyed, they will regenerate endlessly. Ricardo, along with the rest of his group and those who had joined him, headed for this mountain. On the way, the large group encountered many of these golems. The hunters tried to destroy them with their weapons, but the limbs and all other parts of these monsters quickly regenerated. That is why the monsters continued to attack until the core was destroyed. The guild leader shouted that he had warned them that they would regenerate immediately, so they should destroy the core quickly, not giving it time to regenerate. Therefore, using his power, he killed the creatures that were fighting these people. As a result, they began to gather into a single ball, pulling each other together. Then the man used his dark magic and an explosion occurred. With a smile on his face, he turned to the others and said that first they had destroyed all the cores, developed golems, and would destroy them one after another. So the next ones to follow him and his subordinates, destroying the cores, said that it was indeed easier that way. Jason said he didn't want to come here, but now he seems to like it, even though he's still cool, even if he is a cheapskate. Lucy said that as soon as they entered the snow-covered mountains of golems, they needed to destroy as many of these golems as possible. The hero noticed that this meant they should get involved in any fight, and that this was some kind of special condition. The girl replied that this was correct, that it was one of the conditions for the appearance of the intermediate boss. During the investigation, it turned out that this dungeon was an inductive dungeon. Jason asked what an inductive dungeon was. Ricardo said that's why he said it would be difficult, because it means there are hidden areas. Dungeons are usually divided into zones, and if the hunter knows the route of a normal dungeon, they can quickly reach the final boss zone. New inductive dungeons must be completed in order by season. If they are lucky enough to complete one zone, the rest will simply not appear. Lucy said this is just a guess, but probably 15 years ago, due to some mistake, this dungeon could not be completed. Because of this, the secret area did not appear. The hero noticed that in order for the intermediate boss to appear, you need to defeat a lot of golems. The girl said she didn't know how to restart the dungeon, so they had no choice but to stick to the conditions and move forward. In addition, they needed to defeat him as quickly as possible, because if the reward for killing the intermediate boss was the key to the second zone, then the Bloody Tower had come for it. They must get this key before the others. The others fought with the main character, and he thought that he didn't care what they had in mind, but the main thing was to return the legendary sword. Then he turned to the insertion skill and used the web of the Great Spider. Naturally, after this attack, the golem was bound, and the system reported that using the giant spider's web activated internal vibrations. It was because of this that after being bound, the monster was immediately killed by destruction. Someone asked if this was the reward for defeating the Great Spider, that is, the giant spider's web. The interlocutor replied that he thought so, but could this useless item really be used like this? Lucy also did not stand aside and used her freezing attacks on the creatures. After she stopped them, she immediately shouted to her partner, and he understood what to do. So he immediately rushed into the attack and began to crush the cores of all these golems. On the other hand, the rest of the group fought the large creature. The guy shouted that he was going to deliver a powerful blow, and his comrades said they should retreat. But it was too late, and the huge monster easily hit them with its attack. After that, Elizabeth came to the aid of her comrades. She stopped near it and prepared to use her magic. So she touched the creature with her palm, and the system reported that a Kwayashi shockwave had been used. When this happened, the monster began to gradually disintegrate from the core to all other parts. The girl asked these people if they were all right, and they replied that everything was fine and thanked her. Suddenly, she noticed a boy who was trying to hide from her. So she walked closer and shouted for him to stop immediately. Then she took off her hood and shouted that it was Roger, asking what the hell he was doing there. Her brother asked what the problem was, since he had come as an official member of Jason's group. The girl asked what other member of the older group he was, but her interlocutor replied that it had always been that way. Before that, he asked if they were really going to go to the dungeon, because he wanted to go too. The hero looked at this and thought it was a pitiful sight. Roger noticed that his friend would get lost again, like on the bridge, and wondered what he would do then, because he definitely needed a guide, since he had spelling difficulties. The hero told him to cover his mouth because he wouldn't be alone there, although he agreed and said, "Come with me." His friend asked if it was really true. Jason replied that it was true, but only as a member of his group, and his companion said that of course he agreed to that. The guy also had a request that only this person could fulfill. The girl said it was interesting what Mr. Jason had in mind. After all, he was also low level, and his brother read that she should not mock him timidly. Because the boy had seen with his own eyes who had cut down Quiche, and it was Jason. Elizabeth realized that, come to think of it, he seemed to have grown a lot since their first meeting. Besides, the skill he was using now was quite strange. And it is exactly the shockwave of that very boss, and her brother doesn't seem to be lying either, but it's unclear how he managed to do all this and where he got so much power from. Michael moved forward with his partner and told her to watch how these bees work for the good of the hive. After all, they are trying their best to win. The man watched the main character and the rest of the group fight. Therefore, he said that by disguising themselves with the team members using the concealment skill, they reap the rewards. But even if they use concealment with the Hunter's region, there are high-level ones, so it may feel like they will be discovered. However, people like them are not afraid of anything during battle, and rarely use detection skills. As far as they are concerned, they do not know who fate will bring them into contact with. Therefore, their skills in stealth and the use of hidden weapons are at the highest level, so they are not easily caught. The main thing is to act skillfully, and this is the motto of the Bloody Tower Guild. He then asked his companion if the mana was accumulating normally, but the girl did not answer, and continued what she was doing. Michael said that this bath battery is quite expensive, and it can hold the mana of hundreds of destroyed small monsters. With 10 such batteries, you were able to reopen the rift in the Rainbow Dungeon. Sarah asked how many it would take to restore the legendary item to its original state. He noted that it would probably take twice as many, and the girl said that he wanted to roll back the stolen legendary item and defeat the boss of the hidden dungeon. Michael said that almost everyone in this area says that there is a powerful barrier, and the only thing that can cut through it is the longsword of the Corisian dragon. Sarah asked where he got this information, and her interlocutor said not to ask too many questions. She should just roll back the items when he asked her to, and the less she knew, the better she would sleep. She noticed that she was just nervous, because she hadn't been down to the underground in a long time. He, in turn, continued to fool various people. After that, she looked at him and said that she didn't care. As long as their agreement was in effect, she didn't care what Mr. Michael was up to. She thought that if she could obtain the item of infinite creation, she would be able to bring her parents back to life. The hero continued the battle and said that he had already killed 200 cobblestones, but there was no end to them. There was snow all around, but he was sweating like a horse. The core of another creature flew right into his hand. The hero caught it and said that it was strange that this crystal was different from the others, so he would copy it just in case before breaking it. Then he didn't understand what was happening, because he himself had gone into the ground. Suddenly, Ricardo approached and said that everything had already begun. Jason asked what he was talking about and what had begun, and the man replied that they had fulfilled the conditions for moving on to the next zone. That was why the intermediate boss of the location would appear right now. And we are talking about none other than the migrating golem. In fact, a huge monster maneuvering golem appeared out of the snow, which was the intermediate boss of the Snow Mountain golems, with a level of 150. After appearing, the creature did not hesitate for a second and immediately rushed into the attack. The people who were the first to be hit said that it was too huge. The guild leader used his power and shouted for everyone to step back. The guys then asked what had happened, whether it had already been killed, and the interlocutor remarked that he had been a little too scared. But the core was still intact, so the monster began to reassemble itself. The hunters saw this and realized that it wasn't going to be so easy. Ricardo also looked at what was happening and prepared for the ensuing battle. The monster had already fully recovered and was preparing for further confrontation. The man used his dark magic to destroy it again. The creature broke into small pieces, but soon began to reassemble, because its core had not been destroyed. Ricardo became angry when he saw what had happened and shouted that it was a hateful core. The hero watched what happened and decided that now he needed to bind the core with the web of the Great Spider. So the system reported that the Great Spider's web had been used, and the core began to be bound by the web at that moment. But despite all attempts to bind it, the creature continued to regenerate. So, after a few moments, the hero stood next to a huge monster that was ready for battle. Jason realized that things were bad, because this creature didn't care about the web at all. Something had to be done before it merged with the rest of the golems, when suddenly someone shouted at him to get back. The guy looked over and saw Elizabeth use her power to attack the monster. After that, it began to glow blue and fell apart. When the girl saw what had happened, she said that striking attacks were useless, so it was necessary to damage all of its fragments at once. Ricardo was indignant and said that he knew that, so she shouldn't act like a know-it-all, which is why he was looking for another way. Because if they didn't come up with anything, they would have to melt all the remaining fragments here. Otherwise, it would never end. The hero understood that's what it was, and that was the power of the migrating golem. Earlier, Lucy had said that the most difficult part of this dungeon was the migrating golem. That is, the intermediate boss, and besides, this dungeon is inductive. In order for the next zone to appear, the previous one must be cleared. The new zone always interacts with the old one, adjusting to their battle results. Once the golems are killed, a migrating one will appear, which will collect the remains of the monsters they killed. In other words, all the stones they defeat will then gather into one stone mage, which greatly affects morale, and usually the group either runs away or dies. In essence, the migrating one is comparable in power to the final boss of a normal dungeon. Elizabeth said that in this case, there are only two ways to defeat it. The first of these is to destroy its core. The second way, she implied, was to melt all the remains of the golems, which is exactly what she was doing right now. This required a fairly large supply and expenditure of mana, so she was already breathing heavily. But even so, that huge monster had already begun to appear behind Elizabeth. She turned her attention there and wondered when it had managed to get behind her. Then she immediately turned toward it and used Hellfire. The hero realized that things were bad, because if he used the abilities of the longsword, Lucy would notice it immediately. That's exactly why it won't be possible to destroy the core, although it's worth waiting. Because he has another folk item, the guy immediately went to the inventory. From there, he took out the Bear King's Claw, which has the properties of an indomitable beast. The first skill can hold any object for a certain amount of time. The second skill penetrates any object and also deals damage. The hero realized that this was a completely different matter, so he copied and absorbed the King Bear's Claw. The system reported that the first skill was absorbed and, when used with the Great Spider's web, inflicted powerful paralysis. The second skill is absorbed by the insert and penetrates the target, absorbing 15% of its health and attack. The main hero saw these stats and realized that everything was fine, and hoped that it would work. Elizabeth continued to stand right next to the monster, which continued to burn with fire. George wondered if she really intended to melt all the remains of the golem. Lucy realized that no matter how strong she was, if she continued in the same vein, her mana would run out. The huge monster, in turn, continued its attempts to recover. Of course, the girl could see perfectly well what was happening and used her hellish flame. So the restored golem continued to burn with fire. Another attempt to set the creature on fire failed, so the migrating golem immediately rushed into attack. The hero realized that the hellish flame was not working. Could it be that she had already run out of mana? At the same time, a web began to envelop the monster. Very soon, the creature turned into a huge cocoon, and the main character stood next to it. The girl asked in surprise if he had really done all this. Ricardo was also stunned, and wondered if the Great Spider's web was capable of such things. His thoughts were interrupted by the guy who asked the chief to hit him again. The man asked what he wanted, since he had seen that the attack had not helped. Then the hero declared that in that case he would catch the cannonball, because they had no time to waste, so he asked him to do it. Of course, Ricardo did not want to do this, but gritting his teeth, he realized he had no choice. So he said that this time he would trust him as his commander, because it would be a sin to refuse. Therefore, a few moments later, the man's powerful dark magic rushed towards the golem. It, in turn, shattered into pieces, leaving only the core intact. When Jason saw it, he immediately took advantage of the Great Spider's web. That very web looked different than before, as if thorns had appeared on it. So they headed towards the core in large numbers, making it stronger. The hero saw what had happened and realized that it was right not to let the core come into contact with the remains after all. Ricardo was very surprised and shouted, "Did he really catch the core? Was it with the help of this useless reward item? Is he asleep?" Elizabeth realized that even though he had become stronger, she still couldn't believe that such a thing was possible. Come to think of it then, in the dungeon of the Great Spider, she had done it herself. When she saw the guy there, he said that only he and his comrade had survived. Soon after, he tried with all his might to ask to join her. Even in the battle with Keisha, this man had also taken the front line. In those most crucial moments, Mr. Jason was always there. Lucy noticed that this was the same technique used by the Bear King, and it was definitely his style. The other hunters began to rejoice that this man had caught the core, knowing that if they had known this was possible, they would have killed the Great Spider long ago. Michael, who was on the slope watching what was happening, was surprised. He couldn't believe what he was seeing with his own eyes. Sarah asked what was going on, whether he had sealed the core in the web, because it was unclear how this had happened at all. The man said that the mana collection was cancelled. They were changing their plan and starting the operation, and everyone should take their positions. His subordinates said they understood and immediately rushed to their positions. The girl asked what had happened, whether the situation was so serious that they wanted to intervene personally. The leader said that it was all because of that strange man, and that it would be a little more difficult to get the key to the core, so he told Sarah to prepare well. The girl, in turn, stood near a huge number of containers with mana. Roger peeked out from behind a tree and didn't know what to do, because it seemed that the main man had gone somewhere. And this girl was collecting mana for some unknown reason. He probably should tell the senior about the atoms. Earlier, the hero had told him to take this thing, which allowed him to use a fairly high level of camouflage, and his ally asked if he was sure it would work. Because it was an expensive item, Jason said yes, so he would have to do one very important job. The subordinate will play a key role in this mission, and he will need to keep an eye on the blood tower. As soon as they find the hidden dungeon, he should report it immediately. They in turn would steal their plan and carry it out. The guy thought that everything was correct. On the other side were his sister and Master Ricardo, and most importantly, his elder. The hero asked if he should destroy him, and the man replied that he had caught him, so it was his reward. The girl replied that this was a valid point. Jason said that if no one objected, then he would do it. He felt an unusual feeling in his heart when people treated him as if he were not trash. The guy had already copied the core, so it could be safely destroyed. He touched it with his weapon, and after a few moments the core shattered into pieces, and the system reported that the migrating golem had been defeated. Following this, the system began to report that the level had been increased several dozen times. The main character also received a reward for destroying the core of the migrating golem. This reward was the key to the sealed heart, which could be used to open a hidden door where the heart of the giant golem was sealed. Jason immediately materialized that very key in his hand. He then joyfully raised it up and said that he had received the key to the hidden area. George said she couldn't believe her eyes, wondering what it would be like to get one step closer to solving another mystery, while Lucy said it was pointless to count your chickens before they hatched. The main character saw how happy everyone was, and was a little surprised by this. He then turned to the system window and checked his status, where he could see that his stats had increased, and with the effect of the sword, he was now at level 285. Just a little more, and he would reach level 300, and then he would finally be able to level up on his own. Ricardo noticed how the guy was rejoicing for some unknown reason. He went on to say that this man was so happy about the victory, even though it was only an intermediate boss, and the girl noted that he had made them both sweat. The guild leader said that he hadn't even broken a sweat and was excited. Suddenly, his speech was interrupted by a strange sound and stones flying from the side. Everyone else also saw what was happening and immediately became very alert. Some kind of pillars with sharp tips appeared around the perimeter. People said that it was a mine designed for large monsters. Ricardo turned to everyone and shouted, "Follow me!" They all ran after him into the barrier. The hunters tried to do so, but it was already too late. So, just a few moments later, there was a very powerful explosion at that very spot. After it was over, people's bodies were scattered around. Michael walked over and said that it was really powerful, considering the cost. It's not for nothing that they say money can do anything, especially if you forget about your conscience. He came closer and said that it was all really too easy. And that's what it means when a person acts so skillfully. Suddenly, he heard a voice shouting that he had finally found him. It was the main character who had used the great spider's web, and it had been untangled. He jumped from above and shouted, standing behind the long sword of the Carizian dragon. So let him return this property to him right now. When Jason approached, he felt something strange and blood gushed from his mouth. The man said that the boy was able to avoid the explosion with the help of the web, but that was not the only trap he had set. It was because of this young man that his plan almost failed completely. That's why he drove his blade into the boy's body and threw him hard in the other direction. Elizabeth was nearby and immediately began to worry about Jason. Then she turned to the system and used the Hell Blaster skill. Lucy yelled at her to stop. George tried to stop her and shouted not to go there, otherwise she would get hit too. A large stream of flame, in turn, headed towards the opponent. It was so powerful that it destroyed everything in front of it, even rocks. After using this skill, blood immediately gushed from the girl's mouth. Her strength began to gradually leave her, so she fell to her knees, holding on to her own weapon. Ricardo shouted that something terrible had happened because healing skills needed to be used urgently. But Lucy declared that the guild leader said that under no circumstances should mana be used here, as toxic gas had been sprayed, which blocked the absorption of mana. It also causes damage when the ability is used, and it was probably released at the same time as the explosion of that column. It was a sophisticated and malicious weapon. It is used to paralyze the movement of high-level hunters, but why are they using such a dangerous thing? The main character appeared from some kind of dark liquid, and was not in the best condition. This magic was used by Michael, who appeared out of nowhere and said he was an amateur. Ricardo saw what happened and shouted that it was unbelievable, because this skill was familiar. Because it was the very forbidden technique that they were supposed to have destroyed in the past, moving in the shadows is considered the highest level of hidden techniques. Therefore, it is completely unclear how he was able to use it at all. The man turned his attention to the main character and saw the key to the golem's heart there. Without a moment's hesitation, he immediately headed for the object and picked it up, taking it into his hands. As a result, the system reported that the key to the sealed heart had been transferred to its current owner, and Michael said that the goal had been achieved. But even so, there was still one thing left to do, and he grabbed the main character. At the same time, he declared that this man must be killed right here. Jason replied that he had been thinking about that too, and his interlocutor asked if he was really conscious. The hero smiled and said that this was his luck, because the one who stole the longsword turned out to be such an insignificant scoundrel. The web that the guy had used immediately began to wrap around his opponent. The man's body continued to be wrapped again and again, and the Spider King's threads were disabled. As a result of this action, the same spikes that were in the previous attack appeared. The subordinates asked the master what was going on, because that was the skill that had been used to defeat the golem, and perhaps they should run away too. The guy said that his mistake was that he dared to touch his longsword. Soon, he said not to go, and the Spider Kings were disabled. But when he looked at that very spot, he was very surprised. All because there was no one where the man should have been. Michael used his power and said that he almost panicked, because it was his first time using such a skill. But if there had been no shadow inside, he would have simply died. So he didn't think that such a pathetic skill could almost kill him, but now he understood everything. All those high-level hunters he had killed before, why did they have such helpless expressions on their faces at the moment of death? But today, this guy would die here too. The hero asked if he knew his name, because his name was Mana Absorber because he shared mana with his comrades, and he tried to transfer it over a distance for the first time, and it worked. His opponent asked what he was talking about, and he was told that he would end here and now. Ricardo said he didn't know what was happening, but he felt a surge of mana, and it was just in time. He would put an end to the Blood Tower Guild right now. So he immediately used his dark magic, and a magic circle appeared in his anger. Michael was very surprised, and realized that this was Ricardo's Dark Lightning, the opposite skill of his shadow movement, and he would not be able to escape, so this was bad. So he yelled at Sarah to do everything right now and put everything back in its place. The girl said she understood everything and immediately began to use her power. Only because of this novel did huge amounts of it begin to be released from the containers. The subordinate used her skill, and it was said that the dungeon would be returned to its original state and reset. Those present were surprised and did not understand what the hell was going on, and in general, what kind of strange wind was appearing here. Someone said that it was a very unusual wind, and that the fragments of the golem were moving with it. So were they really coming back together again? Elizabeth noticed what was happening and shouted that this couldn't be. Ricardo was also very surprised, asking if the dungeon had been reset to its initial state. He made this judgment only because a huge number of small golems appeared, which they fought against, and they did not stand aside, but immediately rushed to attack the people they saw in front of them. The man used his enclosure and realized that everything was bad, because it was all due to the useless poison that blocked mana absorption. Therefore, he had to protect everyone with a magical barrier, but that meant he couldn't attack the golems, and at this rate they wouldn't last long. He had to come up with something. Suddenly, he looked to the side and was very surprised to see Elizabeth there. Without a moment's hesitation, the girl used her power, and the golems were destroyed one after another. The man asked the girl how she did it, and she asked if he hadn't heard Mr. Jason. Because his nickname speaks for itself, Ricardo noted that he understood. But so what? Lucy healed the wounded and said that he was able to generate mana indefinitely and share it with his comrades, saying that it was his unique skill. The Dark Wizard thought that this was impossible because he thought that only mages were capable of such a thing, and here was this low-level, no-name. In order to use their full potential as high-level hunters, they and Lady Elizabeth needed enormous amounts of mana, and yet he distributed mana not only to them, but to everyone else in such a short time. Could it be infinite mana regeneration? She had never heard of such a unique skill. If this is true, instead of looking for the heart of a giant golem, it would be much better for them to invite Jason to join their guild. Elizabeth interrupted her thoughts and said that now everything fell into place. The underground breakthrough on the Rainbow Bridge was clearly the work of the Bloody Tower Guild. George shouted that the problem now was that the dungeon had been reset to its initial state, and it would be bad if they reset the dungeon again. Lucy said that this was not the case, and she thought it was unlikely that the hidden dungeon had not yet been discovered, most likely due to his logic. The girl didn't know if they did it on purpose, but now the probability of a hidden dungeon appearing was 100%. Elizabeth noticed, however, that something still didn't add up, and it had to do with the golems that appeared after the reset, because there were clearly fewer of these stone creatures than there had been at the beginning. Ricardo said that the debris they melted probably couldn't be restored, but in any case, they couldn't waste time on nosebleeds. They had to catch up with the scoundrels. The girl wondered if they really used the same method as in the breakthrough on the Rainbow Bridge, but it couldn't be. It was just unbelievable. The man wondered how Jason was doing, hoping that those scoundrels hadn't been able to kill him. On the rocky terrain, there was a ball made entirely of cobwebs. After that, the main character ordered the great spider's web to be torn apart and freed himself. At the same time, he felt that it was very painful at that moment, and realized that the man he was fighting was just a scoundrel. Earlier, the guy saw where his opponents were and immediately rushed to attack them. He shouted for him to stay where he was and that he would be killed in a few moments. Michael, of course, noticed this attack and blocked it with his weapon. Then he asked what he was going to do and called him a Slovak. The main character shouted that he was going to defeat him, and that it wouldn't take much effort. When he touched his opponent, he immediately activated the great spider's web. The man shouted that it was a useless web, and that he would make sure he could never use it again. At that very moment, there was a huge explosion, which threw their bodies aside. Michael ordered the long sword of the Corisian dragon to release its power. At the same time, Jason protected himself with the web, and it saved him. But the power of the long sword was truly terrifying. But thanks to this, the guy understood how to fully use its power. It was unclear where this guy got so much information about him, and the hero was able to block some of it, but not all. He would have to catch him and ask him about it. Although right now Jason has no idea where he is, it was bad because he probably got lost again. At the same time, the guild leaders were discussing the matter at the Japanese Association. Georg said, "Don't worry so much, Mr. Dalton. Mr. Ricardo from the Future Guild is with them." His interlocutor said that the fact that the Blood Tower Guild was involved was a serious problem, as they had too little information about them. Simon noted that this was true, and that they were unable to kill even a high-level hunter, and gathering information about them was practically impossible. But Midas was able to obtain something. The fact is that their bold actions are largely due to the presence of the International Starfield Hunters Guild. Georg asked if they were talking about that organization. Dalton was also surprised and asked what the International Guild was doing in a Japanese dungeon, and more importantly, why it had gotten involved with the Bloody Tower. Simon replied that this dungeon, despite its current appearance, was one of those destroyed during the great catastrophe that occurred 15 years ago. The army of golems that appeared at that moment was more terrifying than hell itself. Then the rift was sealed by one of the world's greatest magicians, the Japanese hunter, Jennifer Nishihara. Dalton said that all of this was true, and without the sacrifice of the lady at that moment, it was terrifying to imagine what could have happened. The man went on to say that the heart of the giant golem, sealed in a hidden dungeon, still attracts enormous attention from all over the world. Both organizations are willing to do anything to achieve their goals, so it is quite possible that they have joined forces to pass through the Snow Mountain Golem dungeon. In addition, Lucy is the daughter of this woman, Dalton said. They know about it. So in addition to the task of returning the long sword, they need to investigate the death. Simon said that Ms. Jennifer has not been declared dead, and his interlocutor asked if he was saying that all the hunters who disappeared in that dungeon have not been found. Each of them has been declared dead, and when asked if they think she is still alive, the interlocutor noted that there is a surviving witness who returned from that dungeon 5 years ago. That man claims to have seen Ms. Jennifer, but Georg said that couldn't be true. Simon went on to say that due to Starfield's secrecy, only part of the information was available to them, but the fact that there was a hidden dungeon made it even more interesting. Suddenly, a subordinate ran into the room and shouted to the chairman that he had an urgent report. The man asked what had happened, because he had an important meeting right now. The guy shouted that there had been a breakthrough in the underground passage just recently. The guards standing at the entrance to the underground area contacted the others and told them that a breach had occurred. But it was the dungeon in the center of the city that had collapsed, and golems had appeared, so there was panic and chaos all around. Simon realized that it was the same dungeon we had been exploring in the Snowy Mountain, so had it really collapsed while we were passing through? It was unclear what the hell was going on there. Michael and the rest of his guild were moving forward, but it was difficult for him. Sarah asked if there were any problems with the passage, because it was the first time she had seen him so badly injured, so she wanted to make sure they were going in the right direction. The man turned his attention to her and asked why she didn't check it herself. He then told her to look carefully, and she did. Right in front of them was a bridge that led to the mountain, and it was the very same hidden dungeon. Sarah was surprised, and wondered if she would be able to get the heart and the Ganese golem after all. The Bloody Tower group immediately headed across the bridge to the new dungeon. Roger followed them, using his invisibility. He did not lose sight of these people and slowly followed them. And finally, he also saw the passage to the secret dungeon that had appeared there. When the guy saw it, he thought, could this be the hidden area? The subordinates of the leader were the first to move forward to scout. Suddenly, one of them touched something strange that burned his hand. So he immediately turned to the leader and shouted that there was something there, and the man replied that it was a barrier. Of course, the Starfield group had warned him about it. There it was, 5 years ago, sealed by the great magician and strongest hunter, Jennifer. Behind this barrier lay the heart of the giant golem from the hidden zone. Michael told the others that it was time to begin, and that they should prepare to destroy the barrier. They should also keep a close eye on the perimeter, so his subordinates rushed to their positions. The man told Sarah that his sword needed to be restored right away. Suddenly, he noticed that they should wait a few moments because he sensed some kind of rat. The girl looked away and did not understand what this man was talking about. The chief pointed at Roger and said that he was a scoundrel who dared to use stealth against the Bloody Tower. The guy immediately became alert and did not understand what he should do. Michael, without pausing for a second, rushed into the attack and told him to die immediately. It was a ferocious rabbit, a snow mountain rabbit that lived near the hidden area. A level 30 monster that was constantly hungry and aggressive. Defeating it would yield a magic stone, so the man rushed into the attack and said that it turned out there were other monsters here besides golems. A tiny golem was not far from the scene. When the ferocious rabbit was killed, the magic stone flew away. The little creature saw this and immediately ran over to pick up the stone. Then it stopped and looked intently at the man, as if asking him something. There was the main character, who noticed that it was asking if it could eat the magic stone, and if so, what it would do. The small creature ate it without hesitation, but the hero was happy, because he had already copied it anyway. He could never have imagined that a dramatic golem could have such skills. With its help, one could create a golem if one invested in mana. The first skill can be used to create a first-level golem according to one's own imagination, and the second skill can be used to create and modify the armor of a first-level golem. The third skill allows you to share your senses of sight and hearing with the golem you create, and as the level increases, the distance at which you can share your senses increases. The hero realized that the copying itself was successful, but it was a pity that he couldn't absorb the skills, although it was a cool thing, and if the guy made more cores, he would have an army of golems. This means that he doesn't need a guild to protect the dungeons. The Snow Mountain Golem can grow to level 10, and its form can be freely transformed. It can also share its feelings with its owner. The hero thought that if it was so big at the first level, what would it be like at the 10th? Although if the golem grows into a huge pile, it will be very inconvenient. Suddenly, the guy saw his ward break away and rush to attack a person. It turned out to be Roger, who ducked and managed to get away from the little creature. Jason wondered if it was his subordinate. The boy saw his boss and, frightened, immediately ran up to him and climbed into his arms, saying that he thought he was going to die. Soon they were running together, and he said with conviction that perhaps the bloodthirsty ones had found the hidden area, although perhaps that would be for the best. He then apologized and said that he didn't think he would be spotted so easily, thinking that with his high-level camouflage, he would be safe. His comrade noted that he was fine, but the man from the Guild of the Future was not so lucky and was killed. Jason thought that Ricardo was pretending not to care, but in fact he was thinking along the same lines as him. In any case, the bloody ones definitely should not be underestimated. His subordinates noticed that if you say, "By the way, there was one girl there," the interlocutor asked what other girl was there. Roger noted that he was right. She was absorbing mana with some kind of device, and suddenly the dungeon was destroyed. The guy thought about stopping her, but then he remembered what the boss had told him, and to be honest, he got scared, so he apologized. The hero patted him on the head and said that everything was fine because he had done well. The boy noticed that when it came to that girl, he thought he had seen her somewhere before, but he couldn't remember where. Then he turned his attention to the side and asked what kind of creature was waiting for them. The hero said that it was okay because it was his assistant. Roger asked if it was his golem, and he looked very cute, so it turned out that the older man had familiars, which was so cool. They arrived at the right place, and the guy said that there was a hidden area behind this bridge, thinking that if they did something careless, they would be noticed immediately. Because among these people there are those who can sense hidden beings, the hero turned to him and said, "With you, he brought Lady Elizabeth here, as well as Ricardo's head." His companion asked what he was talking about, because he would be left all alone, and they had the legendary sword. Jason said not to worry, he had a way to track them. Roger said that he understood everything, and since he said so, he would do it, although he would like to stay with him. The chief took out an item and told him to take it. The interlocutor asked if it was the core of a migrating golem. It turned out that he had used it to summon this little monster. Jason said that now it was his assistant, and he liked it very much despite its cuteness, as it was quite strong and would come in handy. The guy asked his superior if he could accept such a valuable gift, and the hero wondered what other valuable gifts he had, since he had a whole wagon load of them. Then the subordinate thanked him for the gift and said he would bring his sister and the others right away. Jason thought that, oddly enough, for the heir to a large guild, he was quite down to earth, probably due to the influence of Lady Elizabeth. Despite everything, he decided right then and there to create his own assistant, and the system reported that the core of a migrating golem had been used. The guy, he thought, really does seem to fit his idea perfectly, and now he decided to put mana into him. The hero created an unusual familiar, a bird that could fly in the sky. The system reported that the third skill had been used, and now the hero was sharing his feelings. Jason watched what was happening through the bird's eyes and thought it was quite unusual. Finally, he saw what was happening there and was a little surprised. So this is who the girl Roger was talking about is, but it's unclear what she's doing with his legendary item. Mana continued to be released in large quantities from the containers, and the girl used her skill. Therefore, the system reported that the long sword of the Carisi dragon had been returned to its original state. This weapon is a sword created from the essence in which the soul of the Carisian dragon dwells, requiring a level of 30 or higher, and a level modification of plus 200, which is given passively. The second skill is applied according to the total level. The passive increases the user's defense by 35%, and the first skill is called vampirism. It absorbs 15 health points and mana from the target of the attack. The second skill, Berserk, is activated when the user's health falls below 15%. All user-level parameters are temporarily doubled for 1 minute, and the recovery time is 1 day. Right now, the durability was at 6%, but very soon it began to rise and reached a level of 100. Therefore, the system reported that the strength of the Carisian dragon's long sword had been fully restored. It was at its maximum, and 94% of it had been restored. After using her restoration skill, Sarah was almost exhausted. Michael, in turn, pulled out the sword and said it was a job well done. Finally, the durability was fully restored, and an aura covered his body. Jason saw this and thought that it couldn't be that the durability of the legendary sword had been restored, and that this skill was very strange. Therefore, he could say that this girl was the bearer of a gift curse. If the strength of the weapon had indeed been restored, then it meant that this girl had the skill of restoration, in which case he simply had to copy this ability. At the same time, he immediately wondered if he could copy other people's skills at all. He needed to figure out how to do it, because if he couldn't, everything would be bad. Otherwise, he would simply have to recruit this girl to his group. Michael said that the time had finally come to destroy the barrier of the hidden zone. After that, he immediately headed towards it, using the weapon he had in his hands. When this happened, a strong flow of energy immediately began to spread throughout the area. Sarah felt it and tried to stay on her feet against the onslaught. The hero watched what was happening and wondered if this was the barrier of the hidden zone. The man said that if it weren't for the information from Starfield, he would have had a hard time trying to break it with this key. 15 years ago, the great magician Jennifer cast this spell to seal the hidden zone, and only the legendary blade of the legendary hunter could break it. Sarah asked what all this could mean, and the man replied that the true owners of the longsword were Jennifer's husband, Frederick. He disappeared without a trace along with his wife in this hidden area, and the woman cast a barrier over it and made her husband's blade the only key so that no one could destroy it. The hero wondered if the real owners of the sword were the most legendary hunter in the world, Frederick, and his wife, the greatest magician, Jennifer, and their daughter, Lucy. So that's what this gender weapon is for. Michael said that everything would be put off until later, and now it was time to open this Pandora's box. He ordered the long sword of the Carisian dragon to unleash its power. That is why a huge amount of energy began to spread in that very area. Sarah and the others hid to the side to protect themselves from this force. The hero realized that things were bad because his golem couldn't withstand such a surge of energy. But this was not surprising, because if the sword's strength had not been restored, it would have turned into dust, just like his familiar. The chains that surrounded the huge barrier soon began to gradually disappear, and a huge breach appeared in the barrier itself, near which Michael was standing. He smiled and said that the gates of the dungeon were an illusion, and that he had probably worried for nothing, but now it was time to clear the hidden area of the snowy mountain. They had to move forward because they had to find the heart of the giant golem. The main character wondered what he should do now, whether it was worth pursuing them alone, and mentally begged his subordinate to hurry up. In southern Italy, there were some rather interesting events in the dungeon. The man said that this person had come for him, so why didn't he just kill him? It was unclear why all his companions were there. His interlocutor noted that if he killed only her, it would be immediately clear that it was murder. But if he killed the whole group, it would look like a normal failed raid. He used his power and blood spilled, and the system reported that since the owner of the ability had died, the skill would pass to the next available user. The man who did all this immediately was slashed across the neck. And that's where he got another time mark. Therefore, this man already had a considerable amount of power. He used his system, which reported that it was highlighting all objects here. After that, the man used the skill and cut out all the selected objects. Because of using this technique, a huge hole appeared in front of him. He sensed the presence of someone nearby and immediately turned his attention there. It was a girl who said that the selection fit well into his collection. Cutting out objects one by one was quite tedious, and now it saves a lot of time. The man said that in order to acquire a cursed skill, he had to kill its owner every time, which was quite troublesome. But what was even more infuriating was not that. Because when the skill passes to him, it doesn't evolve, and that's just unbearable. The woman noticed as she told him that it was only possible to acquire someone's skill by killing the owner. But in order to acquire a skill without killing its owner and still be able to develop it, you need the skill of insertion. The interlocutor said that he had been looking for it for 10 years and could not find it anywhere, so he did not understand whether such a skill existed at all. The girl said that in their world, it existed in a slightly different form, which meant that its presence was not in doubt, and that the search skill was looking for the other cursed ones. The man noted that he understood that, but as for the cancellation skill, she said that, according to the information she had received, the Blood Tower Guild had just destroyed Jennifer's barrier. In addition to the cancellation skill, they desperately needed to obtain the heart of the giant golem, without which they would not be able to use the full potential of the cursed skill. The interlocutor stated that in that case she would pass the information on to the others, and the group led by Ricardo moved forward. The man said it was simply terrifying. Despite the fact that they were rushing with all their might, it seemed that they were not here, just as the battle should have been, so had they taken the wrong path? The main characters said that not much time had passed since they entered here. It just seems like there aren't that many monsters here. Since the road is straight, they should catch up to them very soon. Elizabeth asked Lucy if she had any idea where they might have gotten the information. The girl said it was just her guess, but she thought Starfield was behind it. Her companion asked if she was talking about that organization. It was unclear how a top international guild had come into contact with killers like the Bloody Tower. Lucy said that most likely the reason was her mother. Jason thought that if it was Starfield, then that was where the Bloody Tower got all its information. The breakthrough of the Rainbow Bridge dungeon, as well as the theft of the legendary ball and the Snow Mountain Head, were most likely all planned. All of this means that the upcoming journey will most likely not be so simple. In this battle, it is not the cores of the Believer Golem that will play a key role, but Lucy herself. Ricardo shouted that they needed to hurry up, that it was easier to get all the scoundrels out of the Blood Tower than to waste time guessing, which is understandable if Starfield is behind it. It was becoming clear where they got their teleportation skills from, and now all that remained was to catch them and interrogate them. Roger ran alongside his little familiar and asked the others to wait for him. The man asked him what kind of weirdo was running after him all the time, and the guy noticed that it was his familiar, which Jason had given him. The guild leader noticed that it was a snow golem, and so that's how it was. The girl asked why he had given such a valuable item to Roger. Jason replied that he was simply a very valuable member of the group, and besides, he owed him his life. At the same time, the guy stepped on some kind of magic circle, which began to glow brightly. Ricardo also stepped on it, so the three of them were in that place. A few moments later, they all simply disappeared. The main characters, along with Elizabeth, tried to do something, but they couldn't. They all rushed forward, and in a few moments found themselves in the magic circle too. The hero saw a bright light and did not understand what was really happening. They crouched down because the energy of this place was quite strange. Then they tried to call out to Roger and Ricardo. The guy asked what was going on, because they had just been following them, and now they were nowhere to be seen. Suddenly he looked to the side and noticed a terrifying monster that alarmed him. It turned out to be a dragon, which saw the people and immediately rushed to attack. Jason was terrified by this situation, and did not understand where this creature could have come from. Elizabeth, however, did not panic at all, and using her weapon, rushed forward. First, she used a skill called Witch's Blade and cut off the creature's head. So it immediately fell to the ground, crushing the soil beneath it. Jason wondered why a dinosaur-like monster had appeared in the snowy mountain golem, and Lucy said that this place seemed to be in another dungeon. Most likely, it could be said that this was a multi-dimensional dungeon. The hero noticed that if she was talking about it that way, what could it all mean? Elizabeth shouted that it couldn't be, and heard that these dungeons had been destroyed. And all this happened during the great disaster 15 years ago. The girl replied that it was true that her mother had sealed them all, but now one of them had been reopened. That is why we must not forget that the hidden area in the snowy mountains was also sealed, and magical circles were installed in the multidimensional dungeons. And they connect them to different dimensions. When a magic circle is activated, a portal opens, connecting their world to other dimensions. That is why there is a risk that they will find themselves in an extremely dangerous dungeon right now. Elizabeth said that this was why Mrs. Jennifer had set up a barrier in this area. Lucy said that her mother believed that it was the multidimensional beings that had gotten out of control. In the end, it was they who caused the great disaster, Jason said. But then where are their comrades? He heard in response. Probably in the dungeon of another dimension. If they pass through each zone in sequence, they will eventually reach the heart of the giant golem. The hero said that this was at least some kind of chance, and that they should hurry through this place. After that, he looked to the side and saw that there were many dinosaurs there. George noted that this was easy to say, but very difficult to do. And in the central city, there was a tense atmosphere, with destruction and explosions all around. It was here that huge golems were rampaging, attacking the people who were defending themselves. Naturally, hunters were sent here to fight these creatures. They said that everything was bad, because if the core was not destroyed, everything would be useless, and then turned to the mage to ask him to deal massive damage. The wizard noted that he couldn't do it now because they didn't have any potions, so he had very little mana left and would be glad if someone could help him. The hunter shouted that this was bad enough. This guy who always replenishes his mana when he is so needed. The man remarked that he would never have thought they would need a mana carrier so badly. And while these people were fighting another huge monster, another one appeared behind them. The hunters didn't have time to do anything about it, but suddenly another person appeared and saved them. He fought with a large katana, then landed on the ground with ease. The boy thanked him for saving them and asked if he was a foreigner. Charlie said that he was on a business trip and couldn't just stand by and watch. The man thanked him for saving him, and another man noticed that his Japanese was very good, which was why he was wearing a suit. The foreigner noticed, and if we're being honest, he was now even curious about what a Monono was. The hunter said that none of that mattered, because he was a weak boy, unable to fight, and his only skill was the endless regeneration of mana. That's why he gave it to all his allies. His interlocutor asked where he could meet this person, and the man replied that they hadn't seen each other in a long time, so he didn't know. That's how he remembered him today. Charlie wondered if he had even heard of the skill of infinite mana regeneration. It was unclear whether such a thing really existed, when suddenly someone shouted that they had finally appeared. The guy looked up and saw Simon from the Midas Guild and Dalton from the Tychon Guild. Well, it seemed that an interesting spectacle awaited them. Dalton noticed that it was definitely a giant golem, and there was no doubt that it was a breakthrough from the Snow Mountain Golem dungeon. Of course, this was the perfect opponent for Simon's head, and he would also impose a buff on him. His interlocutor said that he was a perverted scoundrel. It was not at all clear what was really going on in this dungeon, so he rushed into the attack and shouted for him to pass it on to the chairman. Namely, that the guild would be squeezed out of their class equipment warehouse, at which point the man put on stone armor. After landing, he soon looked more like a golem than a human being. The first creature that noticed him immediately rushed to attack. The man declared that stones are not all the same, and his opponent was nothing but a nobody. Therefore, with a single blow, he easily cut down the creature in front of him. After that, he continued to move forward and destroyed everything that was visible before his eyes. As a result, a large number of cores began to rise, and they had to be destroyed. To do this, Dalton used his power. Therefore, a magic circle formed around him, which he soon directed forward. And this very flash destroyed everything in its path, destroying the cores that had been lifted up. Simon smiled and said that this old man could kill everyone himself, while he himself said that he would impose an enhancement on him. And so the man reached the largest golem, which was destroying everything in its path. The monster saw the man in stone armor and rushed to attack him. The head of the Midas Guild asked if he really thought he had a chance, since he was just dust. That's why reinforcements soon appeared, and his fist became covered with stone spikes. As a result of this attack, the giant stone hand of the golem and the stone hand of the man clashed with each other. But unfortunately for the huge monster, his strength was not enough to withstand the man. Therefore, it gradually began to crack and break into pieces, and soon it was completely destroyed. Because of this, only the core that remained of it appeared in the sky. Simon then shouted that he would not let the old man beat him and kill the boss. So he grabbed the core with his stone hand and destroyed it in a few moments. The system reported that the boss had been defeated, so the rift had been successfully sealed. The hunters who were at this location and fought rejoiced at this victory. Charlie used his search skill and saw that the user did not have the skill. He only learned that this person's name was Simon, that he was the best hunter in Japan, and that he was also the head of the Midas Guild. In the end, he managed to break through the dungeon in less than 10 minutes, and that was without any cursed skills, all of which was quite useful information. On top of all this, he was curious to see if the cancellation skill had returned from the dungeon, hoping that it had not been lost in that battle. And just as he was thinking about this, the girl received a serious wound in her side. All this happened 20 minutes ago, when unidentified creatures appeared in front of the group. The man saw their huge numbers and said that it meant a horde of zombies. They had no information about what would happen next, so they would have to rely solely on luck. The dimension seems simple enough, so maybe they'll get lucky this time. As he was talking about it, you already used your power and wielded your weapon, so the large number of zombies that were right in front of them were easily destroyed. Soon, only ruins and corpses remained at this location, and the system informed the man that he had cleared the hidden area and would be moving on to the boss arena. Everyone understood what awaited them and immediately prepared for action. Some kind of energy began to form under their feet, spreading strongly to the sides. One of the leader's subordinates shouted that they had finally reached the boss. Michael saw the door in front of him and said that apparently this key was needed for this door. So he immediately walked over and inserted the key directly into the keyhole. The door actually yielded to this manipulation, and when they opened it, they moved forward. The subordinates saw huge statues and asked what they were, but perhaps they were just statues of gods. One of the men said that they might have come too early, and that the boss had not yet been resurrected. Sarah wondered what he was talking about, because as soon as they entered, the air became heavy, as if something was pressing down on her. Was it really true that no one else noticed this right now? Maybe they had already gotten used to such an oppressive aura. The guy said it, and apparently that was the case, because then they should just take the reward and leave. But as he was talking, a huge hand appeared above his head and easily crushed the man. It was precisely those who did this who were the ones who immediately moved forward. The rest of the organization's members realized that things were bad, because the boss was a statue, which meant that the other statues would also fight. In fact, as soon as he said this, everyone else came to life and rushed forward to attack. At the same time, Sarah was very frightened because she realized that she was completely incapable of fighting. The girl looked at her dead comrade and was horrified. Michael wondered what had happened to her, because she had seen other people die many times before. So he immediately shouted at her to pull herself together, because he was still breathing, and she should heal him. She immediately came to her senses, and realized that her help was needed now. So she turned around and ran to the man who should still be alive. There she stopped and took out a mana storage device that spread energy around. But when she looked into the storage container for this energy, she realized that it was completely gone. She also noticed other storage devices and couldn't understand why the mana was leaking away. It couldn't be that the seal on the batteries couldn't be removed even with high-level dissipation. It was unclear what was happening, but all the mana was flowing in one direction, and it was unclear where it was going. The statues continued to attack the other members of the organization, and they tried to escape. The leader then shouted at them not to be afraid to attack, because they were big, but in the end, they were just golems. So he didn't stop for a second and rushed to attack one of the statues, which he easily struck with his weapon. He then shouted to the rest of his subordinates to use mines for large monsters, but the guy said they were trying to do that, but the mines and skills weren't working at all. As she was saying this, a monster appeared right above him. It killed the guy quite easily again and threw his head aside, and he screamed that everything was bad. Then he turned his attention back to the statue that had grabbed his subordinate. It mercilessly held him in its hands and crushed him. Michael couldn't believe his eyes at how cruel these statues were. Then he said that everything was really bad, because if everyone else died, it would be bad. Because if that really happened, he would not be able to cope with the work. Michael called these huge scoundrels stone idiots and prepared for battle. He ordered his long sword of the Corisian dragon to release its own level. But at the same time, the system reported that there was not enough mana to release the level of the longsword, and the man asked what this was, since his level exceeded 300. Therefore, it was unclear how there could be a mana shortage. Then he saw the statue's hand right in front of him and realized that things were very bad. Fortunately for him, he could still move in the shadows. So he used this skill and hid. At the same time, Sarah was following the flow of mana, which was heading somewhere else. And then, in one of the secret rooms, she saw where all the mana was accumulating, because this thing was absorbing it. She tried to get closer to it and do something, but the thing emitted a huge amount of energy. Because of the very bright light, nothing could be seen inside, but the girl managed to touch it. Then she lifted this huge thing and asked if it was really the heart of the Ganese golem, but it was unclear why it absorbed mana instead of regenerating it. A few moments later, she saw the object begin to split into pieces. Sarah realized that this was very, very bad, and she had to get away from there immediately. So she tried to run away, but a huge stream of energy had already begun to emanate from it. One of the deadly rays was instantly released and flew towards the girl. At that very moment, Sarah was in its path, and it struck her in the side. The man immediately lost his concentration due to the sudden and powerful attack, so he fell to the ground. This hurt her quite a bit, so she screamed. This action naturally attracted the statue's attention, and it noticed her. So it immediately headed towards the girl to attack and swung its weapon to kill her. When this happened, a shadow appeared right next to her body. Michael emerged from it and tried to stop the statue from killing the girl. The creature was quite strong, so the man even felt intense pain, then took an advanced healing potion from his inventory. The Hunters Association restores 80% of health and reduces incoming damage when taken. It can also be applied directly to a wound in an emergency to support the body. So Michael did just that, then grabbed Sarah on his shoulder and started running. At that moment, the system informed him that the giant golem's heart had awakened and the boss battle was beginning. The man was terrified and did not understand what it all meant. The very door through which they had entered began to close, and the man saw it. Of course, this was already very bad, and he began to panic, but he realized that he should use the shadow movement skill. But at that moment, the system reported that there was not enough mana to use the shadow movement skill, and Michael could not understand where all his mana had gone. So without stopping for a second, we had to run forward. The man tried to reach the door, which was now almost closed. He realized that this was very, very bad. The door was closing, and at this rate, they would both be stuck here. So he decided what he needed to do right now and grabbed the girl by her clothes. After that, gathering enough momentum, he threw her forward and managed to push her through the closing door. Her body slowly rolled across the floor and came to a stop on the other side. Soon, Sarah tried to get up a little and asked why he had done that. The man smiled and said that if she survived, she would probably be able to fix everything. A few moments later, the door slammed shut. The girl said that he was a fool because she was not a hunter, and therefore did not know how to absorb mana, so she would not be able to restore everything to the way it was. Thoughts began to creep into her head that she had come here for nothing, because if she died, what would happen to her mother and father? At that moment, she felt very warm indeed. Could it really be mana? The girl tried to open her eyes a little and saw a guy in front of her, but she didn't understand who he was. Jason saw that she had opened her eyes and asked if she was okay. Sarah thought that this man was the hunter who had been distributing mana to everyone. She felt her body gradually gaining strength, and at this rate, she might even survive. The hero gradually began to do so, and did not say a word, concentrating on his own strength. Soon, he asked if it was true that if she had enough mana, she would be able to restore her body. His companion was surprised that he knew about her ability. Ricardo shouted, "Are they kidding? They finally made it here, but they can't open a stupid door?" Lucy said that if there were still hunters inside undergoing trials, the door would not open on its own. There was a sure way to do it with a key, but as they knew, they did not have one. The man shouted that it was a mistake to defeat the resurrected wandering golem first, and then come here. He then turned his attention to the girl and asked who she was. In response, he heard that she was apparently the chief healer of people, the Blood Tower. She had been mortally wounded, but thanks to Mr. Jason's mana, she managed to heal herself, and they put her in special handcuffs. He does not suppress mana, and when they get out, she will need to be interrogated. The man said it was easy to say that if they did not pass, this place would turn out to be a trap. Lucia replied that this was also a possibility, and Ricardo said that this was why there were so many missing people in this dungeon, and that he might also get lost in these mountains. The main character thought about whether he should use the key he had copied, then ordered the system to open his inventory. There was a huge number of different items, including 2 keys to the trial hall and the heart of a giant golem. The guy took one of them and thought that it was just lying there. Lucy thought that if this was the door that her mother had sealed, then there must be something inside. That's why she approached the keyhole. Great. When she touched it, her hand began to sink inside. The girl was very surprised when this happened, and the symbols on the door began to glow green. Everyone present was very surprised when the door began to open. Elizabeth asked how she had opened it. A light similar to that on the door emanated from under her cloak, and the girl explained that the cloak belonged to her mother. It seemed that she had reacted with the door, and the hero realized that the girl was the key to this dungeon, and that they would have to explore this multi-dimensional labyrinth together. Roger, who was nearby, wondered what this eerie pressure was. The sister said they should be careful. As soon as they entered, their mana would begin to disappear. The hero turned to Sarah and asked if that was what she meant, to which the girl replied affirmatively. All this was happening because the heart of the giant golem was absorbing all the mana around it, and seemed to be converting it into its own. Jason realized that if it was absorbing mana, then everything was clear. Sarah shouted that they needed to get out of there immediately, because even a high-level hunter without mana couldn't defeat it. The guy asked what she meant. Two huge statues appeared from the open door and moved forward. Roger asked what the hell was going on. Elizabeth turned to Mr. Jason and shouted for him to give them mana. The guy replied that he would do everything right now. So he used his power again and thought that everything would be fine. Then he shouted, "All these creatures trembled before the great Mononos." So the system reported that the user's mana had been copied. The copying and pasting took quite a long time, and the system got stuck and said it was repeating the paste indefinitely. Because of this, it was clear that a huge amount of mana was emanating from the main character. Sarah was simply discouraged when she saw this and did not understand what it was, because mana floods the entire dungeon, and so it turns out that it is also being absorbed by that cube at an incredible speed. The girl looked at Jason and realized that with his help, she would definitely be able to save her mom and dad. Elizabeth thanked the guy for his help, and said that this would definitely be enough to defeat these statues, so she used the Great Witch's Blade. Because of this attack, the huge stone creature in front of the girl was instantly killed. Ricardo also did not retreat from his attacks, using his dark power. He said that if he had mana, it was just cobblestones and pieces of stone. That's why he used a spell called Dark Thunder Spear and killed the statue. The creatures in front were defeated, but suddenly more appeared. The man wondered if he had brought his friends, but it was just in time, and he was so enraged by this dungeon that he was now going to tear them apart completely. So he used his dark magic again, namely a huge attack called the Dark Thunder Scale. Sarah carefully examined the room they were in right now. When she looked to the side, she saw Michael sitting against the wall and realized it was him. The moment she walked over and got closer to this man, she realized that he was still breathing. Just because of that, it was definitely possible to bring him back to life. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to Jason, who had come close to Michael. The guy looked closely at this man, but took no action. He just bent down and picked up the weapon that was lying next to him. The hero thought to himself that now that he finally had this long sword in his hands, as expected, its strength had been completely restored. Now he could say for sure that this girl possessed a cursed ability, so he would definitely copy her skill. But first, he decided to try something else right now. So he approached the man, and touching him with his hand, instructed the system to copy the target's shadow movement skill. But the copying failed because the target's level was higher than the user's. The hero realized that even with the power boost from his longsword, he was still weaker. He saw that the target was very hostile towards the user, so in this case, there were two options for obtaining the skill. The first option was to destroy the target and absorb its skill. The second option is forced absorption of the skill, which can be chosen if the target's health is below 15%, but the target will not be able to use the skill afterwards. The hero thought, if he considers him an enemy, he can kill him and obtain his skill, so it is possible to do so, but now he clearly has less than 15% health. This means that he can absorb the skill without killing the target, and forced absorption may even be useful in the future. Ricardo turned to Sarah and said that she was a healer, so she should heal him to the point where he could walk on his own and no more. When he said that, you immediately destroyed the shackles, noticing that he had a lot of questions for him and that if he ran away, it would end badly for both of them. After his release, she immediately looked at the main character. Then she went over to Michael and started using her power to heal him. Jason noticed that the severed arm literally grew back instantly. It was because of this skill, comparable to his own, that allowed him to copy the body. Soon the man began coughing up blood quite heavily. Sarah asked him why the old man was smiling, and he replied that he had said that they were both alive. After a short recovery, the girl immediately turned around and walked in the other direction. Elizabeth approached Michael and immediately put shackles on him, saying she hoped he would be able to get out of these handcuffs, and then she would be able to kill him. "Let him thank Chief Ricardo for not leaving him here to die," the man remarked. "Everything will be as she says. Just let her get them out of this hell." Then she turned her attention elsewhere and said that it was about to begin. When the man said this, there was a bright flash on the mountain. Michael took his attention away from himself and decided to take advantage of this, so he ran forward. The girl burst out when she saw what had happened and shouted that he was a scoundrel. A bright beam immediately spread throughout the room and headed toward the people. Roger noticed what had happened and immediately shouted to his sister about it. The deadly rays spread from the cubes that contained the golem's heart. The hero saw the beam flying towards the guy and shouted to him about it. Roger noticed this, but it was too late for him to dodge. His familiar quickly followed him, wanting to save his master. 30 minutes ago, Ricardo used dark lightning in the multi-dimensional dungeon of the skeleton. Roger's familiar saw a large number of crystals, so the guy asked if he really wanted to eat these magic stones. The man said that he could eat them all because they weren't worth much money. That's why the little bread stopped near these crystals and gradually began to eat them. The system reported that the Snow Mountain Golem had risen to the second level by 25%, but could grow to the 10th. It could also freely change its shape at the second level, and share its feelings with its owner at the second level as well. Roger came closer to it and patted it on the head, saying that it had raised its level. Suddenly, the creature somehow began to interact with him, and the guy asked what else it could do. And right now, the owner of this little golem was attacked. The little one didn't lose his composure and immediately interacted with his owner, putting on stone skin. The hero saw this and thought, could the creature have merged with Roger? It was unclear how he managed to level up in such a short period of time. Ricardo thought about it. No matter how many times he saw it, it really looked like Master Simon's stone skin skill. So that's how the golem's core is used. He would have to look into it when he got back, when suddenly he saw his barrier pierced by a beam. Of course, he saw the attack and easily dodged the deadly weapon. Lucy told him to be careful, as these beams were made of pure mana. This mana is so dense, the beams are so sharp that he cannot block them with his protective magic. Elizabeth joined the conversation and said that even so, it wasn't all bad, because that's exactly why they could be blocked with physical force. Suddenly, she noticed an attack flying in her direction and used the witch's blade. She easily deflected the deadly beam that was heading in her direction, and the hero thought that everything was exactly as the girl had said. It was precisely because the mana was so dense that they could physically defend themselves with swords or shields, so even Roger's device could block them. But still, they cannot move forward if they just continue to defend themselves. Because the guy can endlessly restore his mana, the giant golem's heart can continuously shoot beams. They need to get close enough to this place to destroy it, or else they will all simply die, so they need to find a way to do this. And now you have a new power that you recently acquired, so it's time for the shadow technique. That guy from the Bloody Tower was able to move through the shadows even inside the giant royal spider's thread, so now the hero can use his skills and no one will know. The system reported that using the giant spider's threads activated the shadow movement skill. So the hero, who had wrapped his body in threads, disappeared somewhere. George saw this and was surprised, so he asked if he had really disappeared. But the guy, in turn, simply moved to the very place where the golem's heart was located. He ended up on the safe side, where there were no rays, and he could stay calm. He came closer and said that the resonant frequency of Kwayashi should be enough to destroy this thing. After that, he concentrated his energy and tried to destroy that very spot. But when he tried to do so, he felt pain and blood gushed from his mouth. It turned out that this cube had combined mana to cause an explosion. Jason shouted, "Who the hell are you?" Because he was the one who gave him mana, didn't he know that? The hero touched the ball again and used the spider's threads to seal it. Therefore, a huge number of them began to gradually approach the ball from which the rays emanated. So very soon it was completely sealed. Ricardo, as well as everyone else, wondered if the main character had managed to seal the continuous attacks of the giant golem. Roger smiled, thinking that his senior was really cool. But despite their joy, which did not last long, they saw that the rays began to spread again. Jason also understood what had happened, so he said that all this was not enough. That's why he headed back to the cube and used the giant spider's threads. The guy thought that if he could touch it just one more time, he would definitely win. And yet he managed to do it, so he said that everything was ready. The system reported that the use of Key's resonance frequency was to destroy the target. A huge amount of friendly energy immediately began to spread throughout the object. The hero saw that the system reported that he had leveled up, and cracks appeared on that very deadly cube. At the same time, the heart of the ice golem shattered into pieces after a few moments. When this happened, a very bright flash of light began to appear in that place. The hero saw a system window that reported that he had destroyed the heart of the giant golem, and the dungeon had been cleared. The guy smiled and rejoiced when he saw this, thinking that everything was as he had expected. The system reported that a huge number of new levels had appeared, and the hero was happy because he had raised them very high. The system then reported that he had acquired a reward item, which was the heart of a level 1 giant golem. The first skill could regenerate mana infinitely, and the second skill could absorb or store mana up to a certain item, and on top of that, it could develop. Jason thought that he could regulate mana infinitely, so he didn't need it, but he decided to copy and paste it just in case. The copying ability leveled up, and now it would automatically copy objects that could be copied. The hero saw this and realized that automatic copying was very cool. Roger ran up to him and shouted that this was what was expected of his senior and that he was truly amazing, but the hero asked him not to hug him. When this happened, Ricardo immediately addressed him and the guy looked at him. The man said that it seemed like he had somehow managed to get the heart of a giant golem and that it was a good job, but the guy said that there was no need to add anything. Elizabeth noticed that if he wanted to praise someone, why not do it right, because that way he would seem like a small person. Ricardo told Jason that he wanted to have a serious talk with him when they got back. The guy remarked that if he wanted the heart of the Hell Golem, he would sell it to him for a fairly high price. The girl asked if he could discuss such important matters with the association first when they returned, and the man asked why she was trying to interfere with them. She said she couldn't ignore such genuine deals, and her interlocutor asked what other genuine deals there were. Finally, the fight ended, and the main character went to Lucy and George. The hero noticed that it was a gift from Lucy's mother, and he apologized for returning it so late. The girl accepted it and said it was okay. She was grateful that the guy had returned it as promised. George asked him to wait, wondering if he had used the same skill as the master of the Bloody Tower Guild. Ricardo noticed that now that it was mentioned, he had indeed managed to cover a huge distance in just a moment. Alerted, Jason said that the skill of the Royal General's threat acquisition had increased in level, and he was able to move very quickly while hanging on the rope. His interlocutor didn't really believe him and looked at him with surprise. Elizabeth noted that it was unpleasant to ask about other people's skills and that they should go back. They needed to hurry up with the investigation about these guys. Michael turned to Sarah and remarked that she would still have to repay him for saving her, so she should hurry up and reboot the dungeon. His interlocutor asked if he was out of his mind, then agreed, but said it would be the last time. The man asked if it was because she had learned about the boy with infinite mana, although it would be difficult if she suddenly forgot about the contract. The permanent restriction would never allow her to betray her partner. She had a vow bracelet on her hand. So as long as she wore that thing on her wrist, she would not be able to run away from him, and she should also remember that even her parents were in his hands. Therefore, she should remove it immediately, as he risked his life to save her, so she must repay her debt to him. There should be enough mana in this place to do so. Sarah, in turn, had no choice but to obey his order. The hero sensed what was happening and thought it couldn't be true, but the girl sat down on the ground and, touching it, began to use her power. Jason yelled to the others to hurry up and get out of the dungeon, because it would be recharged again soon. Lucy asked how it would be recharged, because if that happened, who knew what dimension they would end up in? The main character realized that this was very bad, so he used his shadow step. That's why, in just a moment, he was already next to the girl. He asked her why she was doing all this. Looking at him, she didn't answer, but the guy saw her eyes full of tears. So he didn't stop and used his recharging technique to reset the dungeon. The main character rushed after her and tried to pull her away. The green energy that appeared after the girl used her ability pulled everyone around her. As a result, there were several green barriers in this space, as well as a red one. But even they couldn't withstand the onslaught of all this energy and flew away in the other direction. So very soon they were pushed out of another dimension and ended up in the central city. Those present noticed that a breach had appeared in the energy that was in front of them. Roger shouted at the main character, trying to get through to him. Elizabeth asked if she was really in the sky above Tokyo, but what had happened here. Lucy noticed why it had happened, but she herself did not know. However, things were not so simple, and suddenly Elizabeth heard someone addressing her. It turned out to be her father, who asked what they were doing there. The girl was surprised when she saw him. Ricardo was also surprised, and asked where the head of Dalton had come from. The man replied that he had the same question for them, whether they had passed through the dungeon. By the way, where were the rest of the team members? The other leader said that a strange situation had occurred there. The daughter of the man they were talking to began to explain what had happened to Jason. At the same time, Michael was in the dungeon asking what was going on, wondering if the dungeon had not returned to its original state. Sarah explained that this guy had interfered with her, so she couldn't roll everything back to the way it was. The interlocutor replied that it was no big deal, as it seemed that the others had disappeared and the shackles were no longer on him. So all he had to do was get the giant golem's heart, and that would be it. Jason yelled at him to cover his mouth and immediately used the giant spider's web. But both of his skills reported that the item had not been found. The hero was very surprised when he saw this and thought, how is it not found yet? What the hell is going on? Sarah asked if she had just rolled back not the dungeon, but him. The hero thought, is this a joke? After all, his memory and physical condition hadn't changed, so he called up a window to see what had happened. There, the guy saw that his level was number 1, his health was low, and his class level and skill level were also number 1. Jason thought, how could it be level 1? Had he returned to his original state upon awakening? But then what about his cursed skill? He saw that both were at level 1, and realized that his skills had also returned to their initial state. It said that one unconfirmed object had been found. It was available for copying and pasting, but the guy didn't understand what it was, and suddenly blood spurted right next to him. It turned out that without a second thought, Michael had poisoned him to kill him. The man said that it seemed he was unlucky because the level had returned to its initial state, and just in time, that scoundrel would simply die. Jason thought he needed to be calmer because the curse had not disappeared, and there was also an unconfirmed object to copy. Perhaps it was him before they rolled him away. That's why he should just give in and be defeated. Suddenly, Michael clashed with George, who also remained in this dungeon. The man noticed that he was surprised, because he was the one from the International Association, and the hunters didn't know he was here. The main character asked if it was really George here, but why was that so? His interlocutor shouted at him to get out of his way and leave it to him, so he should just run away. Jason replied that this was not the case, and that he would not abandon him under any circumstances. Michael started laughing loudly and asked if he was getting too cocky right now, because the person he was fighting right now was nothing but dirt under his fingernails. In the end, he shouldn't dare to get distracted when fighting alongside him. The weapon the man was defending himself with was destroyed, and the sword pierced his stomach. As a result of this powerful attack, the man was thrown far to the side. The enemy leader rushed forward and said that he was already better off destroying their stupid office anyway. The convoy realized that this man was too fast, so he would not be able to dodge the attack. But in order to protect his comrade in arms, the hero rushed into battle, putting his back to the enemy. As a result, a huge amount of blood gushed from his wound, and he immediately fell to the ground. George saw what had just happened and asked why he had done it. The hero replied that this guy was his prey and he didn't need any help. So, let him get out of here right now. Michael asked what this scoundrel was talking about. Let him die right now. That's why he rushed into the attack again and cut the guy's body in front of him. As a result of this fairly instantaneous attack, the main character was cut in two, and it's safe to say that he was definitely dead. The enemy leader smiled and said that he didn't think this scoundrel would return to his previous state, but the objects remained intact. He turned to his subordinate and asked if she understood that she could only count on him. Let her not look at him, for he was sure that she had fallen into despair when she rolled back his progress. Surely this scoundrel was already thanking him from the other world. Precisely because he had saved him from all this suffering, the hero said he was truly grateful that he had killed him and cut off his hand. Michael immediately grabbed his limb and began to scream loudly in pain. The main character was standing right in front of him and said that he was afraid he didn't have the guts. The man and Sarah were very surprised when they saw this. The opponent asked in despair what the hell was going on, because he had killed him with his own hands. He immediately picked up the weapon that was on the ground and asked what kind of skill this was. Then he rushed into the attack and asked what kind of person he was, or what he was really like. The main character was finally able to use his inventory and used the web of the great spider. The man called him a fool and asked if he had forgotten, using the skill of moving in the shadows on the system, informing him that it was absent and could not be used. Now the opponent was absolutely terrified and asked what else it was, then shouted at Sarah to roll back the dungeon right now. But the subordinate shouted that she would not do it because she did not want to. The boss yelled at her even louder and asked if she had forgotten about the Adam's Ring agreement. If she didn't want to die, she should quickly return the dungeon to its original state. With the help of this very bracelet, he began to spread energy, and it caused the girl pain. The main character noticed what had happened and understood why she obeyed that man. Most likely it was all because of the bracelet on her wrist. So, without a moment's hesitation, the guy rushed towards her and stopped next to her. Immediately after that, he touched the bracelet with his hand and began to manipulate it. He used his copying skill, namely the Kishi resonator. So, in a few moments, the bracelet that had been restraining her all this time was destroyed. Sarah was stunned when she saw what had happened and couldn't believe her eyes. Michael yelled for him to stop, because he would definitely tear off the scoundrel's head, then tried again to use the skill of moving in the shadows. But he didn't understand why it still wasn't working. Jason noticed that there was a good reason for this. After that, he used the skill himself and said that it now belonged to him. At the same time, he used his weapon and cut his opponent's body. So the opponent immediately fell to the ground because he was bound by a web. George was surprised when he saw what had happened, and the guy was heading for the golem's heart. Then he picked it up and said that it was all because of this pathetic thing. It turns out that this man had broken into the dungeon and taken so many lives. At that moment, he took advantage of Koyashi's vibration and said that a man like him deserved nothing, and then broke the golem's heart. As a result, the system reported that the high-level dungeon's folk item had been destroyed, and a unique reward had been obtained. Soon, Jason had that very reward item in his hands, and the system reported that the hidden dungeon of the giant golem's heart had been cleared. The other hunters were surprised and said that the door had opened, which meant that the dungeon was protected. So they slowly began to go inside, but asked what it was, since there was no one there. Suddenly, one of the men saw the guy and noticed that it was Mr. Jason. So he asked if he wasn't with Chief Ricardo and Ms. Elizabeth, and the hero said that he had lost them during the cleanup, but they were together, so there was no need to worry. The hunters asked if that meant he had cleared the dungeon alone. Jason smiled and said that you could say that, so it was time to go back. The next day, the young man and the other members of the hunters' organization had a conversation. He sat at the table at the meeting near Ricardo so he wouldn't be far away. The others present began to discuss what had happened. Dalton said that the hidden dungeon in the snow-covered mountains of golems turned out to be multidimensional, and that was bad. They say that passing through such a dungeon affects other dimensions as well. Simon said that this was understandable, meaning that this was the reason for the breach. Georg said that what was more important was that Lady Jennifer's seal had been removed, and multidimensional dungeons were harbingers of great disaster. He was referring to the catastrophe that happened 15 years ago, the man said in his head, but it was too early to jump to such conclusions. Another person joined in and said that this was true, that it was just one destroyed multidimensional dungeon, and Georg noted that they were also saying such naive things at the time. In response, the man asked what he was talking about and how he could do that. Elizabeth could no longer listen to everything they were saying and immediately slammed her fist on the table. She then said that she apologized, but she was leaving, and they needed to question the members of the Blood Tower Guild as soon as possible. Otherwise, they would not be able to solve this problem. Simon asked if she really thought that while they were away, they were just having fun, and who, in her opinion, was dealing with the breach they had caused. Ricardo immediately asked everyone to calm down, saying that they hadn't expected this either, and that he had been told that the leaders had made every effort to resolve the issue. The interlocutor said that he wasn't saying all this to brag, then approached the hero and noticed that it was the hunter who was speaking. Jason cleared the hidden dungeon. If the rumors were true, then why hadn't they heard anything about him? And who was he anyway? The guy smiled and said he was a hunter. Simon said he knew who he was and decided to mock him anyway. The hero got up from his seat and asked what he wanted from him. He cleared the hidden dungeon with minimal losses and also discovered a dangerous multidimensional dungeon, which, in his opinion, was a reason for praise, not interrogation. Simon got angry when he heard this and said that it was interesting. He knew who he was and continued to mess with him. Ricardo noticed the situation and realized that a serious conflict was brewing. The others wondered if they were going to start a fight right there. At the same time, the chairman immediately turned to the head of Midas. He said that if he continued in the same vein, he would not receive a reward for eliminating the dungeon breach. Immediately after saying this, the man calmed down for a moment. Of course, he was still angry and told the main character that he was lucky this time. Jason noticed his technique and wondered if it was stone armor, but could he copy it? Soon, everyone headed to the office of the association's chairman. Georg asked if it was true that he was a hunter named Jason, but which guild he belonged to. The hero said that he used to be in the Taiken Guild, but for certain reasons he was now a freelancer. The girl wondered if he had really been there. The man told the hunter that it was difficult to level up alone, but he had managed to pass through an extremely dangerous hidden dungeon, which was impressive. So well done. On behalf of the association, he expressed his gratitude to him. The hero, of course, thanked him for that, and wondered if that meant that the chairman himself had recognized him. George also thanked the representatives of the International Hunters Association, and asked if he could find out their future plans. Lucy said that first they would return. In order to report everything to him, George added that he plans to stay here. In addition, he intends to leave the International Association of Hunters. Very soon, the main character headed home. But there were a lot of people there, and he asked them to wait, because it was his house, and he didn't understand what the hell they were all doing there. George said that he had left the International Association. That's why he now has nowhere to live, and will have to stay with him for a while. Lucy was curious, but why did he decide to do this? And the man said he was sorry, but he couldn't explain the reasons yet. Roger said that he and his assistant simply couldn't leave the old man. Elizabeth said she had just come to convey Sarah's demands, so she should not be equated with these people. The hero noted that, incidentally, those two were still there. The girl replied that Michael had been detained and was now undergoing treatment in the hospital, and Sarah had refused to heal him with her own skills. When he regains consciousness, he will be transferred to prison, where he will be interrogated. The girl is still in the interrogation room at the Hunters Association. She is currently exercising her right to remain silent and is not saying a word, but is demanding to meet only with Jason Spungen. The girl is thinking, most likely, that something happened between them in the dungeon that morning. She added that, by the way, Sarah is a member of a popular idol group, and Roger said that now he understands where he knows her from. The hero said that she was most likely forced to sign a contract so that her skills could be exploited, and he destroyed the bracelet that bound her. Therefore, she would no longer have anything to do with Michael. Later, he would go to the association and visit her. He then asked what Ricardo was doing there. The man said that there was only one reason why he had come to this room. George asked if it was the heart of the giant golem, but Mr. Jason had destroyed it in the dungeon, and everyone present looked at him and asked what he was saying. The guild leader shouted, asking if he was out of his mind. How could he destroy such a super rare artifact? The main character, in turn, used his inventory and took this thing out of it. He said that what was actually destroyed in the dungeon was a fake, thinking that he had broken a copy, so it was a fake. George wondered how what was destroyed in the dungeon could be a fake, because that couldn't be. Then how to explain the clearing of the dungeon. So what was it? Had he done something? Ricardo offered 50 billion and said that he had said he would sell it for that amount. Elizabeth told him not to be surprised by the amount, as the item was worth more than that money. and the association could offer 80 billion. Roger told the elder to look at the items at auction, which start at 100 billion, and those present asked why he said that. Ricardo got angry and asked why he had gone so far, because the guy had promised to sell it to him. So he shouted further, "How about 200 billion? If that's not enough, let him name the price at which he is willing to sell it." A short time later, the hero was lying at home with the artifact in his hands, thinking that this couldn't be true, that it really wasn't worth 200 billion. That is, he would secretly put the copied golem's heart up for auction abroad, so he would soon become obscenely rich. The guy was happy about this and thought that in addition, thanks to clearing the dungeon, his level had risen to almost 300. He then got up and said that he was so preoccupied with money that he completely forgot about the unique reward. That's why he went to his inventory and took it out. The system informed him that it was a sealed item, and that he could remove the seal by pouring a little mana into it. Jason noticed that if we're talking about it, it's easier than easy for him. So he did it, and another item appeared in his hands, called a particle of dimensions. The system said that by collecting all the particles, he could create a key of dimensions. This would open the doors to the desired dimensions, and the particles would be attracted to each other. Their number and the level of access would depend on the level of the key. The hero thought about what else the measurement particle could do. It would become a key, one of 5, which meant there were 4 more. But why wasn't it automatically copied? Naturally, the guy tried to copy it, but the system reported that it was an item that could not be copied and pasted. Jason realized that it couldn't be copied, which meant he would have to collect everything himself. But that was bad because this skill seemed to be becoming useless. A few moments later, the guy heard a knock on the door and asked who was there. It turned out to be George, who addressed him and said he wanted to clarify something with him. The guy asked if this gentleman was still awake. A few moments later, they looked at each other, quite hostile. The main character saw that the man who had come to him was holding his own weapon. So the guy got up from his seat and asked what this man was up to. The man, in turn, did not hesitate for a second and immediately rushed to attack. So a few moments later, the guy's body was pierced by his blade. 15 years ago, Europe was talking about when the terrible disaster happened. Monsters were destroying everything around them, one of which was a level 500 plus drake, a creature classified as a lower species of dragon, but with characteristics comparable to the higher ones. People shouted that this creature was using fire and were the first to pursue it, aiming to strike it with a magical explosion with an ice attribute. The wizard who arrived at the scene of the battle shouted that he understood everything. The woman headed in his direction and immediately used her technique called Ice Bolt. The creature in turn did not simply let this attack pass and hid behind its wings. The man said that he didn't have a single scratch on him, but his companion asked if they really couldn't handle such an ultra monster from class that had appeared out of nowhere on their own. Drake didn't stop for a second, so he attacked the rest of the people with his fire. Those who were caught in this massive attack tried to hide, running away so that the deadly fire would not reach them. But the creature circled around, trying to kill as many people as possible. One of the men ran away and told George that they should run, because they couldn't fight it. The appearance of the anomalous monster plunged the world into hell, and as a newly awakened novice hunter, the man resigned himself to death. But suddenly he heard someone address him and ask if the rookie was okay. The guy immediately opened his eyes and couldn't believe he was still alive. It turned out that right in front of him was the man who had just saved him. George looked at him closely and wondered if this was the legendary man, because he could say for sure that he was the world-famous hunter Frederick Hugh, the guy thought. Thank God he was saved. A few moments later, Drake, who had been raging all this time, was defeated. George was stunned when he saw the huge amount of blood in front of him. The creature was still alive, but it was looking strangely to the side. Soon, something strange began to happen in its stomach, as if there were small explosions, and it was bursting apart. So when its body reached its peak, it exploded into small pieces. Of course, it was struck by the legendary hunter Frederick. George realized that he had done it, and thought it was just amazing. Thought he should wait, wondering if he had just been killed. He couldn't actually see the bodies, but he didn't understand what was happening. Soon a girl appeared and told Frederick that she had told him not to use it in front of strangers, and the guy thought he didn't understand when she arrived. So was it she who saved him from this huge explosion? The man said it was an emergency, and it was the fastest way to defeat this entity. The girl noticed, of course, that his scales were as hard as a dragon's, and if they had left it alone, the country could have been destroyed. Frederick approached the man and told him what he had just seen, asking if he would keep it a secret. The man was a little surprised, but said that he would, of course. The other hunters arrived and said that it was unclear who had defeated Drake, and that someone had even torn him apart like that. Frederick said he thought it was time for them to leave, and the girl added that she agreed. The guy stood up and said that he had recently become a hunter. His name was George Grant, and he was from the Grant family, so he asked people to remember him. In response, Frederick said he would remember him, and gave his full name. George thought he was a hunter whose skill surpassed death and the greatest hunter in the world, Frederick Hugh. But at that time, the guy had no idea. The fact that after this man's disappearance he would meet another with the same abilities was irrelevant, but he wanted to see it with his own eyes. And right now, he wanted his predictions to be correct. The hero used his power and put a weapon to his neck, then asked what he was trying to do. The man thought that, as he had expected, Jason had the same skill as Frederick Hugh. His interlocutor said that he was really sorry, but he just wanted to check and see his skill with his own eyes. The hero said that he was trying to kill him to check. Suddenly, they heard Roger addressing the older man and looked at him. The young man was very surprised and frightened at that moment, so he asked what was going on. The hero asked him why he was still there and realized that this was becoming problematic. After a while, George bowed and said that he was really sorry. Jason said that everything was fine and asked who taught him to apologize with a bow. Lucy said it was her. She had heard that when you commit a serious crime in the East, this is how you apologize. The hero remarked that this was insufficient for murder. The man said that in order to atone for his guilt, he would stay with him. The guy told him not to decide everything on his own. Roger asked if the elder had the same resurrection skill as Frederick, and his interlocutor told him not to call him that. The subordinate noted that this was the ability to return to life after death, and that was why the hero was so strong. The hero thought he should let them think incorrectly for now. He said it didn't matter, and then asked why Lucy hadn't come back too. His interlocutor held out the artifact and said she needed to talk to him about it. Jason realized that this was the very piece he had recently received as a reward. The hero asked if her spatial object had suddenly started to resonate, and Lucy replied that it had, that she had followed it and was surprised when it led her to this room. Her part of the artifact was numbered 1, while Jason's was numbered 5, so she was curious to know where he had gotten it. The guy said he got it when he destroyed the heart of a giant golem, and it was a unique reward. Lucy said she could see that they might need to investigate. The part of the artifact she has is one of her mother's memorable gifts. Referring to a note her mother left her, these pieces resonate with each other, and are also attracted to each other, as has just been proven. Does this mean that perhaps now they will be able to find the remaining parts of the artifact more easily? Roger remarked that, incidentally, it would be interesting to see what they could do with it. Lucy remarked that if they gathered them all, they say it's the key to opening the door to dimensions. Jason asked if they could really open the door with it, perhaps similar to the multidimensional dungeon they had found. The girl replied that this was correct. If multidimensional dungeons existed, like the one hidden in the snowy field of the golem, collecting the pieces would form the key. Therefore, they should be able to freely open and close the door between dimensions, as well as travel through them. The guy said that Lucy had come to Japan not only to search for her mother's whereabouts, but also to gather information about this artifact. The girl said that was right. She believed that her mother and father were alive somewhere in another dimension. George said he agreed because he couldn't imagine them being dead. Roger asked if that was the case. Why hadn't they returned? Could it be that they didn't have the key to this dimension, or that the door could only be opened from this side? Lucy said that this was, of course, possible, or perhaps they were staying there for some reason. The hero thought that they had decided not to return, so perhaps they had some other reason to stay, something even more terrible than the great catastrophe. Jason noted that, in any case, if they could open and close the door to the dimension with a key, they could close the multidimensional dungeons to prevent the catastrophe. Roger wondered how this thing could become a key. At the same time, a small golem reached out for it with its hand. Because of this, he pushed the two particles together, and they collided violently. A few moments later, they changed their orientation and ended up where they were supposed to be next to each other. Soon, there was only a bright flash of light and a force that spread throughout the area. Roger asked what this was, because he thought he was going to die. Lucy looked at what had happened and said, "Did these particles really stick together?" She then reached for this so-called key and said she was surprised. She thought it was cool that if they collected all the particles, it wouldn't turn into a key, but it would just stick together and become one. So now she was convinced of that. The hero looked at her in surprise, not quite understanding what she was talking about. He asked if it was true that the resonant sound had become even louder, and that these parts were also attracted to each other. Lucy said that the louder the sound, the stronger the force of attraction, and they must be careful when these pieces resonate with the other pieces. The girl was sure that the person who had them was not an ordinary person, and the one who had them finally said that they would be able to return home. An interesting conversation took place in the European apartment of the Starfield Guild. The leader asked the girl why she was laughing, since the guys from the Bloody Tower Guild had failed their mission. Sylvia said that the leader had finally received the gift of movement, and they congratulated him because he had taken another step on the path to becoming transcendent. The man said that now he could only use it to move short distances, but eventually he would be able to make it grow only with the help of copying skills. The elf noted that this might soon become possible. and her interlocutor asked on what basis she was saying this. The girl noted that the part in her hands began to resonate, so one of the 5 parts was connected to another, and the one they had should tell them where the rest were. Jonathan asked if she meant that all 5 parts of the artifact had been found, and it seemed that she would soon be able to return home. The girl replied that this was correct. The man asked if her place of residence did not have its own key. Sylvia replied that this was not the case, that one of them did have a key, but that it was now impossible to open the spatial door from the other side, which had happened 15 years ago because of the magician Jennifer. All the spatial doors that were connected to the Earth were locked with a key that was on the other side of the Earth. It was divided into 5 parts, and all of them were sealed in different places. Jonathan said that as soon as they collected these parts, they would open the lock, but would the spatial door open again? His interlocutor noted that everything was correct. First, they would open the spatial door to the fairy country, her homeland, the sacred tree. There is a gift there that is similar to the skill of copying, and if a man can apply it, he will be able to develop his other gifts. Jonathan said that it sounded good, of course, but was it really the same as copying? She was surprised when she first saw his skills. Sylvia was a little wary and didn't know how to respond. The man asked if she really thought he didn't know her intentions. Her homeworld was the dimension of the elves. The world tree of their world had been charged several hundred years ago, and now it was called Dark to top it all off. It was also on the verge of extinction. The elves tried to move the source of this slaughter away from the Earth, but they failed because Jennifer stopped them. But what do they really want? The elf plans to continue her failed operation and connect the earthly dimension with her own, and she is using him to achieve this. The elf wanted to say that this was not the case, but the man said that he was not interested in any of this. He wanted to use her to open more multidimensional dungeons. As a result, he would absorb even more skills to eventually become equal to the transcendent, and what happens to this world is of no concern to him. From now on, he would take action on his own. Sylvia shouted that he shouldn't leave right now because he was the head of the International Starfield Guild. If he moved without any justifiable reason, he could attract unwanted attention and become someone to be feared. Therefore, after completing their preparations, they would have sufficient grounds for him to relocate. In the Forest of Death in the Japanese dungeon, a monster raged. This creature is called Null, and it is level 90. These monsters, which are a mixture of goblins and wolves, may have low combat power individually, but they are very intelligent and act in packs, which makes them very dangerous. And it was these monsters that spotted the humans and immediately rushed to attack them. Roger asked the senior member if there were many of them here. George was next to them and said that there were, and that they'd better retreat. Jason thought that this was the dungeon he had finally found because he had asked Elizabeth about it, so there was no way he was going to retreat. This was the perfect chance to level up the golems, so he asked the creatures what they were waiting for and told them to hurry up and come to him. It was unclear whether the monsters understood him or not, but they still rushed into the attack even more fiercely. His companions were surprised and didn't understand what this man was doing. The monsters continued to run at a speed that was not true to him, and all they could do was wait. The system reported that a golem core had been used, and that golems were being created, and very soon, an incredible number of these cores were obtained. So the main character released his army of familiars, and they rushed forward. Roger wondered where the golems had come from, and the man asked if it was really the guy who had summoned them. The hero smiled and said that it was eye for an eye, and also pack for pack. George wondered if he could really summon so many golems, so they didn't understand what the hell had happened, and what the true nature of this skill was. The goblin-wolf hybrid attacked the smallest golems. One of the creatures tried to bite the baby's head, but nothing good came of it. Roger said that no matter how strong the golems were, the difference in their vitality and level was simply enormous. But a few moments later, the familiar that was attacked first killed the creature that did it, so the monster flew a very long distance in that very second. And the army of small supporters rushed into the attack because they realized they would win. As a result, within a few moments, the monsters were destroyed. Roger noticed that the elders seemed to be doing just fine on their own, so he wondered why he had come here in the first place. The main character's army finally won and stood menacingly in front of those creatures. The guy approached them and said that it was good that he had managed to test the strength and difference in power of each level. After that, he ordered his subordinates not to return immediately. They immediately obeyed him, and the guy could see the golem's core appear in his inventory. Jason noticed that he didn't have enough space in his inventory to create a squad, and depending on their size and regeneration, it could also take time. Roger wondered if there was a better way to do this, and asked why he hadn't asked Master Ricardo about it. The hero asked why he should ask about it, and the guy replied that he still depended on the dungeon and was sure he knew something. Jason asked if it was serious and should be done right away, so he told George to hurry up. The man said he understood everything and thought it wasn't worth leaving work. Soon, the main character and his subordinate drove up in a car. The guy asked if it was really his car, and Roger said yes, his father had given it to him for his birthday. The protagonist said that he could see that, and what's more, it was a full-fledged version. He thought that now that he knew this, the guy was definitely Master Dalton's son. The guy called Elizabeth and said it was a good job, then asked if she was on her way to the association. Now he understood everything and was heading there immediately. The subordinate noticed that it was a rather sudden call and asked what had happened. The hero noticed that he was surprised and thought that it was probably about Sarah, although in any case he himself had business with her. So he asked Roger if they could hurry up, and he, of course, agreed. Soon, the guy finally arrived at the association and was already in the interrogation room. Sarah was sitting alone at the table, her gaze lost in thought and very pensive. Elizabeth said that she had insisted on talking to Jason specifically, and for 3 days she had not eaten or drunk water, but still remained completely silent. The hero asked if they could keep their conversation off the record, but the girl apologized and said that this was impossible due to the nature of the investigation. Jason thought that whatever happened, even if the true nature of his cursed skill was revealed here, he could still learn her ability and undo all of this, because that was his top priority now, and he headed for the interrogation room. First, he approached Sarah and immediately placed a glass of water in front of her. Then he noticed that it was plain water and let her drink it. The girl said nothing in response and just sat silently for a while. But soon she reached for the glass the guy handed her and began to drink it greedily. Elizabeth said that she had now avoided dehydration. Jason asked if he was right in thinking that she wanted to learn about his skills, namely the creation of infinite mana. His companion said that if he helped her, she would definitely cooperate with the investigation, and the guy said that before that, he needed to confirm something. He then noticed that her ability to restore things, and she was struck by a cursed skill, and that skill was cancellation. As a result, the girl said that he was right. The hero realized that he knew this because he was not the only one who was cursed. In other words, if he could simply copy and paste her skills, it would mean that any cursed skills could be copied and pasted. She thought to herself, could it be that this girl's skill was not healing but restoration, which meant that this was why the strength of the long sword had been restored. Such a skill is quite significant for killing. Roger was surprised to hear these words and thought, no, damn it. They say such skills exist. Sarah said that her mother and father were now in a coma, so she asked for help in restoring them, and he was the only one who could provide such a large amount of mana. Jason said he understood everything and would give her as much mana as she needed. In exchange, he would be a little rude and immediately apologize for it. So he immediately approached the girl and touched her shackles. Roger asked the elder what he was doing. A few moments later, the handcuffs on the girl's hands immediately fell apart. The main character in turn didn't stop for a second and immediately grabbed the girl by the hand. The system in turn informed the guy about copying the cancellation skill. Soon a message appeared saying that it could not be copied, and the hero thought, is this serious? Of course, he realized that there were abilities that he could not copy, but he didn't think that it was actually bad to encounter one of them during the day. Could it really be impossible? Sarah asked in surprise what he was doing right now. After these words, Jason came to his senses a little and immediately apologized for the situation. Then he noticed the error that appeared in front of him. The system said that special abilities could not be copied, but if he eliminated the target, he could absorb it. If he fulfilled this condition, he would then be able to copy abilities as usual. The guy realized that if it was about eliminating targets, then it must be murder, and if he did it, would he be able to copy the ability as usual? It seemed like they were mocking him. In short, in order to copy the skill that cancels something, he would have to kill Sarah, as if he could do that. But he really wants to copy and paste this skill, so is there really no other way? He also can't wait for her to die of old age. Roger asked the others what they thought about why the windows suddenly opened. Elizabeth turned to the main character and asked what was wrong, because he suddenly became very serious. The guy said nothing terrible had happened, everything was fine. After that, he thought that in that case, it was now a test of endurance. He would fulfill Sarah's request first, and earn her trust. In the near future, he might find a better method. And if he couldn't find a better method to unite with her, he told the girl that they should go to her parents immediately. On the same day, they went to the central hospital for hunters, and the hero asked if it was really mana poisoning. Sarah replied that it was true, that they had been attacked by a mysterious monster during the Great Catastrophe, and that this hospital was the only one that treated mana poisoning. Jason understood why they were hospitalized here. She must have teamed up with Michael to earn money for treatment at the hospital. He then asked if Michael was also being treated here, and Elizabeth confirmed that he was currently in an underground room. After he is cured, they plan to transfer him to prison and conduct an investigation. He then asked Sarah if she was worried, but his interlocutor replied that everything was fine, and suddenly George saw something strange. A foreigner walked past him, and the man realized that he knew him, as he had been working for the association for a long time. So he paid attention to him, and didn't understand why this man was here. The man, in turn, did not stop, and continued walking toward the ward, which was guarded by security. One of them saw him and told him to stop, because this area was off limits without permission. The guy handed him a piece of paper and said he was grateful for their hard work. The guard took it and saw that it was the name of a search skill and didn't understand what it was. But just a few moments after he said that, he saw dark magic in front of him. Both guards were terrified because dark energy was heading straight for them at incredible speed. Very soon, both of them were completely engulfed by this energy. Subconsciously, it seemed to them that they were somewhere far away, but in reality, they were in the same place. Only now they had turned dark. Charlie told them to bring the man who was inside and do what was necessary, then return here, and they immediately obeyed. After that, the stranger headed forward, toward where there was some kind of capsule. When he approached it, you used dark magic again, and a purple ball appeared in your hands. Sylvia had said earlier that she had a job that only he could do, so the guy was surprised, and asked about it. The girl showed him the ball and said that in the unlikely event that the blood tower collapsed, she wanted him to scatter it throughout Tokyo. Charlie asked what it was, and the elf said she had brought it from her homeland. It was the fruit of a tree from a polluted world, and with this fruit, a barrier could be created, and it would open up space. The guy asked what she meant by opening a space, and the girl said that to believe it, you had to see it first. After a while, Charlie saw something that greatly impressed him, something he did not expect to see. His companion used the item she wanted to give him, and then said that this was only one fruit, and that she could only show him this. She wants to give Starfield and Jonathan a reason to go public, and the guy wondered if that meant she wanted to build an escape route from his Tokyo dungeon. The organization and he are closely connected by their families, so now he definitely cannot back down. The man, who had been lying unconscious for a long time, finally got up and took off his mask. He was very surprised, so he asked how it was possible that he was still alive. After that, he looked to the side and was not surprised when he saw familiar faces. His wife was also there, alive and well, as well as his own daughter. He turned to Sarah, and she responded in kind. Roger stood there with tears in his eyes, looking at this heartbreaking scene. The older sister was shocked when she saw how he treated these people. She then hit the boy on the head and asked why he was the only one crying. He told the elder that he knew his infinite mana was amazing, but he wondered if it could really revive a person who had lost consciousness. At the same time, he didn't even know if the best healers in the world could handle it, but Elizabeth understood that this recovery was incredible. If there was even one mistake, everything would be bad. The girl would really have to use the association to save this child. Although she decided that she had to witness this herself, the guy told the girl to think about it and wondered where George was. Lucy replied that now that he mentioned it, she didn't know where he was either. Charlie, trying to hide his identity, was moving forward with the man. After a short while, he stopped because the system had given him some information. His search skill indicated that a person with a similar ability had been found. The guy immediately took off his hat and asked if there was really someone with that skill in the hospital. The man in front asked what the hell he was talking about, then realized that Sarah's parents were in this hospital. He hoped they wouldn't tell him that the guy standing right there was somehow connected to him. But then someone called out Charlie's full name. It turned out to be George, who said that the guy was hiding his face with a hat, so he almost didn't recognize him. The man remarked to him that it was interesting that someone from the International Hunters Association had come to Japan, and in the end, he wanted Michael like a dog wanted Strawfield. Charlie said he heard that he had left the International Hunters Association, so what was he doing here? George used magic and started pulling out a weapon, saying that the man next to him was a criminal, so he, who was helping him, was also one. The foreigner said that he was as reckless as ever and couldn't he see that this was a hospital. Michael asked him to give him a weapon because all his equipment had been confiscated, and since he had come alone, he just wanted this man to teach him a lesson. Because in reality he was very weak and couldn't do anything on his own, Jason suddenly appeared and said that he was here too. The man noticed that he was a scoundrel, because his ability was incomprehensible. How dare he behave like that? A few moments later, Charlie saw that the system had notified him of a new search. It said that this person had the ability to copy, as well as to bet. Charlie immediately smiled and thought that he had finally found the skill of copying right in front of him. At the same time, Elizabeth approached and said that it was terrible, because one thing after another was happening. First Michael, and now international crime. That's why, without a second thought, she immediately took out her weapon. The man looked ahead and saw that it was his acquaintance, who possessed a blade witch. The guy was also surprised and wondered if this final boss had suddenly appeared to put an end to everything. The girl said that her horoscope said that today she was unlucky in the most unfortunate and possible way, which was probably why all the overtime work existed. People said that it was Elizabeth the Hunter and she was holding her weapon, so it was unclear what had happened. Michael wondered if they couldn't just take a break. A few moments after saying this, he saw several pairs of handcuffs in front of him. They wondered if these were restraints. The girl noticed that if they could put them on themselves, then they could resolve everything peacefully, and she could go home early too. The man smiled and said that it was quite humiliating. Then he turned to the ordinary citizen and immediately grabbed her by her clothes. At the same time, he asked if this hospital really didn't understand, and that he could take any patient hostage if they didn't want anyone to get hurt. In that case, they should resolve everything peacefully. Elizabeth did not listen to him at all, and rushing into the attack immediately struck him. The blow was so strong that the man did not have time to react and flew a very long distance. Without stopping his momentum, he hit the wall hard. So hard that blood immediately gushed from his mouth, and he lost his concentration. People shouted that the hunters were fighting behind them and that they needed to run away. Charlie was terrified and thought that the attack was too fast, and he couldn't even see it. The girl interrupted his thoughts and turned to him. She then asked if he was really different from Michael, and if they should resolve this peacefully. His interlocutor did not answer, and only turned his head away. She looked at the man who had just been literally hit, and wondered if they were different. Were they really different, or were they not? She immediately remembered her conversation with the elf, whom she had asked why he had been chosen. The girl replied that the cosmic tree was infected with dark mana, and ordinary people could be poisoned by dark mana. But was it true that it did not affect him, and that the master of the Bloody Tower was the same? The guy was surprised to hear that he was the same as Michael. Sylvia continued, saying that it was all true, that he too had violated the international treaty on the use of skills that required dark mana. This was done to make the infected space tree bloom. They needed to use skills that depended on this dark power. The guy realized that, in other words, he was the same because he had recently used the power. Smiling slightly, he exhaled and said that he was the same as Michael. Therefore, he could say that this whole situation could not be resolved peacefully. He immediately began to take out his own weapon and said that he needed this man. That's why he'll take it and leave no matter what. Elizabeth noticed his weapon and thought that the ball looked quite familiar. George said it was Angelus's rapier, and it seemed that this guy was really serious. So the hero asked what he meant. The man noted that this ball had been passed down from generation to generation in a family of holy knights in Britain, and that it was the only holy ball in the whole world. It was of the same rank as the long sword of the Khaleesi dragon, specializing in cutting rather than stabbing blows, and the hero was surprised by its level. He must have noticed that everything was correct, but it was different from a long sword in that it had no attack power, but it regulated the level, also known as the Inquisitor of Heretics. It can nullify all skills and weapons that it considers kinetic. Elizabeth uses a magic sword, a witch's blade, so that's bad. And so, after a few moments, the opponent's weapons clashed in battle. The girl noticed that her weapon was beginning to lose, and therefore the fight was not going well. Jason saw that she had missed a blow and immediately began to worry. Elizabeth told him not to interfere because if he made more noise, he would disturb the peace in the hospital. After that, she immediately pushed her opponent's weapon away, and he was shocked. She then jumped up and prepared to strike him with her sword. Charlie noticed the rather swift attack and jumped back, then asked if she really wasn't going to use her skills just because they were in a hospital. And maybe she thinks she can win with her weapon like this. While the stranger was distracted by his conversations, he noticed that a weapon was already flying towards him. Fortunately for him, he managed to react and held his sword directly in front of him. But holding such a weapon was quite difficult for him, because it was heavy. That's why, under the girl's pressure, he had to retreat again. When he did so, he felt blood gushing from his nose. He realized that simply by blocking her attack, his internal organs had been damaged even before the swords clashed. The difference in their levels was colossal. It turned out that it was precisely this power of the 10th strongest hunter in the world that the girl asked if he wanted to resolve everything peacefully now. At that moment, Charlie, who had already started to panic, decided that since they were in the hospital, he didn't want to use his special skills unnecessarily. Suddenly, Michael addressed them and said that this hunter was just a scoundrel. Everyone immediately turned their attention to him and saw that the man was already conscious. He got up, and it was clear that a dark flower was growing out of his stomach. With a smile on his face, he said that this was the very hospital they so desperately wanted to protect. And he, in turn, would erase its entire existence and immediately planted the flower. Charlie immediately shouted for him to stop and not do that because it was a hospital. The man asked if he understood correctly that this man was going to place it in key locations in Tokyo. In that case, they should leave this flower in this hospital as well. The main character asked what Michael was talking about, and the guy persuaded him. George turned his attention forward and said that it was dark mana. The guy asked about it in surprise, and the ally said that the mana possessed by users of dark skills seemed to be something Michael also understood how to use. There is too much of this dark power. and if it continues, ordinary people in the hospital will be poisoned by it. The main character used giant spider silk and simultaneously activated the shadow movement skill. At the same time, he declared that the person who did all this was simply a scoundrel. At the same time, he tied him up and shouted for him to stop this whole situation right now. But Michael said that he could no longer do anything and that it was too late. The hero asked in surprise if he was telling the truth. Well, the flower that this man had planted was actually emitting large amounts of dark mana. The power spread quickly throughout the hospital, penetrating literally every corner. It was because of this power that even ordinary civilians suffered. The dark tree gradually spread its roots, and soon the hospital was completely saturated with this power. Very soon, a huge tree appeared, on which parts of the hospital were held. The doctor held the patient, who was hanging and begging for help, but after a few moments he couldn't hold her, and her body immediately began to fall. The girl was very frightened at that moment and began to scream loudly, but fortunately the main character was able to use his threads to save her. A few moments later, he calmly laid her on the ground. He then asked if she was all right and asked her to follow him to evacuate. She smiled sweetly when she saw him and thanked him, and the hero thought that it was good that the patient could move on her own. But the situation that had occurred now looked very scary. So he looked down and saw that there were many patients there, some of whom were so badly injured that they could not move on their own. He looked further and saw that Elizabeth and George were taking care of others right now. The hospital was filled with a dark aura, and if this continued, it would infect them all. And if that happened, it would be very bad. In that case, they would be forced to restore the entire hospital with Sarah's ability. There were quite a few people under the rubble. Roger and his golem were rescuing a man, and he asked to lift a piece of the belt. It was excellent work, and they would soon be done. Soon, the main character appeared and immediately turned to his subordinate. The guy noticed him and said that it was the older one, but he was curious about what had really happened here. The little assistant threw a huge piece of debris aside at the same time. Jason came closer and asked if everything was under control here, and the guy noted that this branch was safe thanks to Lucy. The main character was surprised, because he didn't know that the girl would be right here. Soon he came closer and noticed a huge amount of ice holding the hospital in place. So he touched the crystals and asked if it was really ice. The girl replied that he was right, and that it was an ice barrier. It helped prevent the destruction of the hospital ward, but it couldn't completely block the dark mana. A few moments later, his companion destroyed it so that the guy could enter. He and his subordinate began to walk and said that in any case, he was glad that they were safe. He said that the strange tree had destroyed most of the hospital, and that the spread of dark mana was making the situation even more dangerous. The fastest way to solve this problem was to rebuild the hospital, but it might be too early, as the girl thought. Whether she was ready for it, Sarah said she could do it. Because she had already recovered from the dungeon, and because of Jason, they shouldn't worry about the mana. So they soon arrived at the tree, and Roger noticed that it was bigger than he expected. So is this tree the reason? But where did it come from, and how did it get here? Jason noticed that Michael's robot had escaped, and then this tree appeared. Sarah realized that he knew her parents were here, but he did it anyway because he didn't care if they died. Lucy approached the trunk of this huge tree and began to examine it closely. The main character said that they should start rebuilding, and his ally agreed. Immediately after that, he gradually began to gather his strength and direct his mana directly to the girl. She, in turn, touched the tree and began to apply her power to it. And when she began to do so, the tree gradually began to move on its own. The main character, in turn, felt some pain and even groaned a little. But very soon, the roots of the trees began to gradually retreat in the other direction. Elizabeth and George were still near the civilians, watching what was happening. Very soon they saw that the roots, which had completely filled the entire hospital, began to retreat. Sarah continued to use her power, and so everything returned inside the tree. Dark magic also penetrated there in large quantities. Very soon, it spread, and the girl also fell under its influence. The hero saw this, and thought that the dark magic had just come out of the tree. His ally was in danger, and that was bad. Jason immediately stopped using his mana, and rushed towards Sarah to help her. At that moment, he also told the system to use the spider thread. But the dark mana did not stop and continued to touch his body, and did so quite freely. In order to get away from there as quickly as possible, the hero used Shadow Step. When Roger saw him, he asked if he was okay because mana was emanating from him. Jason said that everything was fine, but Sarah had lost consciousness, and it seemed that they had not managed to restore the tree. The guy told his subordinate that until more help arrived, they should start evacuating patients from the hospital. They had to move quickly, otherwise the dark mana would infect everyone. Roger picked up Sarah and told his subordinate that they should run. The main character turned to Lucy and asked what she thought about it and if she knew what kind of tree it was. She replied, based on notes left by her mother, that it came from another dimension, most likely the fruit of a corrupted cosmic tree. The purpose of the fruit is to retain the source of energy from another dimension and bring that very power into this world. Since the main part of the cosmic tree exists in another dimension, the spell did not work, and the girl thinks that the fruit acts as a barrier. Therefore, it must be placed at 3 or 4 key points in Tokyo. 10 minutes later, an incident occurred in front of the central hospital. Rescuers arrived at the scene and said that they should move quickly, because they needed to transfer emergency patients immediately. Hunters also arrived and used their magic to help. One of the guys asked if it was true about the wizard of the Midas Guild, telling him to hurry up and cleanse the dark mana. The hunter told him to cover his mouth because he was trying, but nothing was working. If he continued like this, he would simply waste his mana, and nothing would come of it. The elves said that the infected cosmic tree from another dimension was right in the center of Tokyo, and even seeing it with his own eyes, he couldn't believe it. Elizabeth noticed that she apologized and had already announced a search for Michael and Charlie. Simon remarked that who would have thought that the girl would let someone like Michael just run away like that? So was it all because of Charlie? If he is involved in this, wouldn't it be easier to confront Starfield and the Hunters Association? Ricardo remarked, referring to the Bloody Tower, the Japanese guild. They could use this as an excuse, so why were they asking them to solve a problem caused by a Japanese hunter? There's no need to worry about it because the man will catch Michael soon. Those present heard a strange noise, and someone asked what was causing the tremor, wondering if the hospital was about to collapse. One of the hunters shouted to the chairman that they now had a serious problem, and the man asked what had happened. The subordinate shouted that a second tree had just appeared in the Kita area. Jason immediately thought of Michael and realized that a second one had appeared. Indeed, in the very place the guy had mentioned recently, there was a tree. The news reported that 2 large mysterious trees had appeared in different places today. The Hunters Association also discovered that dark mana was being released by these trees, and it acts like poison, so the government issued an order. Regarding the emergency evacuation in Tokyo, the man inquired where they were planning to evacuate them, while the children were delighted that they would not have to attend school tomorrow. Michael drove in the car with a smile on his face and said that in this situation, they definitely couldn't get them. He then turned to the man who had pulled him out and said that he was also quite ruthless. Even he had never thought of brainwashing people with dark mana. The reporter continued to say that people would not be exposed to mana. So, for 24 hours, there was no need to panic. Everyone should remain calm and follow the police instructions. Currently, the police and self-defense forces are working together. They are also doing everything possible to resolve the situation as quickly as possible. Michael noticed that his ally was contaminating people and turning them into puppets. Charlie got angry about this and said that he was a scoundrel and should stop acting like he knew what he was talking about. The man told him not to be angry, because he had praised him, and they should search for them desperately right now. But as long as they move together, no one will find them. In that case, he was completely sure that those who were looking for them did not expect them to be riding in a police car, only 3 of them, so they needed to get down to business. At about the same time, a conversation took place in the chairman's office, and Georg noticed that he was being told that there was a chance about the 3 from the contaminated trees. It turns out that they will not appear around Tokyo to create some kind of barrier, Lucy said, at least according to her mother's records, and that is true. It seems that the infected trees also appeared during the Great Catastrophe, and they serve as a barrier and a gateway so that the infected monsters will flood into Tokyo. Ricardo wondered if they were really there during the Great Catastrophe. The main character was actually terrified when he heard this information. He remembered a moment from his childhood when that very root appeared. The boy asked his dad if everything would be okay, and his father said that everything was fine, to make sure he was sitting properly and to hold on tight. After that, he stepped on the gas and the car began to move quite quickly. The man realized that things were bad, and that this was what his friend had been talking about. But who in the world would use this in the city center? The tree continued to spread, and suddenly one of the roots headed straight for the car. The main character was very frightened and immediately shouted to his father. He doesn't even know why he remembered this now. Perhaps it also has some connection to his curse. So, what destroyed the car then? Probably it wasn't a monster, but an infected tree. If it was the same person as before, the guy would never forgive him. Georg said that as far as he could remember, a huge tree had definitely appeared in Tokyo at that time, but he had been so busy escaping from the dungeon that he hadn't had time to pay attention to it. So there was a barrier then too. Lucy said that according to her mother's records, a barrier made of infected trees would function as a gateway to another dimension. It would also open up a subspace. Elizabeth asked what she was talking about, and Ricardo pointed out that there was no need to set up a barrier just for a subscription contract. Why not use the contaminated trees of another dimension? It can't be to open up space for the dark spirit, can it? Elizabeth said that to open it, it was necessary to create a barrier from contaminated trees, or at least that's what she had heard. The subspace would require dark mana, from which a dark aura emanated, and one infected tree would not be enough. Lucy said that it probably wouldn't open now, but in the worst-case scenario, a door to a contaminated dimension could also open. The hero thought that if they were talking about subspaces, then they could also be talking about infinite ones. Why hadn't he thought of this before? If he could use it well, he could also solve the problem of storing inventory. Wouldn't it be possible to create infinite golems? He couldn't just let this chance slip away, so despite everything, he would definitely catch whoever was behind it and get what he wanted. Simon asked why they weren't telling the true story. They talked about a dimensional key, or whatever it was called. But in reality, it doesn't exist, and he has never seen anything like it before. The hero took it out and asked if he was talking about this thing. The man immediately looked at him and was simply stunned by this. At the same time, he asked if it was really the same key he was talking about. Lucy noticed that this memory of her mother was now combined with another part that the hunter Jason had acquired in the snowy mountains of the Golem. The man asked if it really existed, but it turned out that these two items could not do anything. The girl said that according to her mother's record of the Great Catastrophe in England, a contaminated dimensional door had opened, and she did not think it was a coincidence that the two objects had appeared at the same time. It is likely that someone brought the infected trees from another dimension, and that they may also be attached to other parts. Georg said that, as the girl noted, the worst-case scenario is that the dimensional door could indeed open, and then it would no longer be a problem only for Tokyo. He immediately contacted the International Hunters Association and the American Hunters Association for cooperation, but Ricardo said they didn't have it. After all, part of it was also in his guild, and an hour had already passed. The hero and the others went to the vault, and he thought how huge the door was, like the entrance to a dungeon. Simon noted that he knew this master was obsessed with dungeons, but let him just think that he even had a dimensional piece. Jason asked how he managed to get it in the first place. His interlocutor stated that since this man was saying nothing, it meant that he had obtained it through some backroom deal, and that it could also be a fake. Igrai paid attention to his system and realized that it was definitely not a fake. Even in his inventory, the dimensional parts resonated strongly. Finally, the owner of this repository opened the door because he wanted to show the main character that very part. Those present began to go inside and saw the wall on which the part was located. Simon noticed that the storage room was so large, but could it be that only this piece was here? The hero noticed that only Ricardo and he would be leaving from here. His companion was very surprised when he heard this, and then asked what the hell he was doing. Lucy said that combining the two pieces was quite dangerous, and who knows what would happen when they tried to combine the three pieces into one. Ricardo noted that they were right, only he and Jason would go inside, as it was his guild, so they should follow his orders. Simon said that he had already seen it for himself, so he wasn't interested in anything else. If some strange dimension opened up, they would do it. And if anything happened, he would kill them. That's why, before they left, he urged them to remember carefully what he had told them. The hero pointed out to Master Ricardo that his part was called number 4. He then asked if he could tell him where he got it, and the man told him to stop talking nonsense and do what he had to do. Then he used a barrier and said that as soon as he united them, he would immediately fall into his barrier. Jason told him not to worry. He thought he had a Dutch spider and the ability to move in the shadows, and he hadn't even taken it out of his inventory yet. When he tried to touch that part, it began to resonate strongly. Naturally, the main character saw this and immediately became alert because he understood that this did not bode well for him. A few moments later, something happened and a large funnel formed. The force that caused this knocked down the door at the entrance to the vault. Elizabeth noticed that something strange seemed to have happened inside. Ricardo was stunned when he saw the dent and the strange space and tried to reach out to the hero. Suddenly, he heard the guy exhale and say that he thought he was going to die, and was also surprised when he realized what kind of ability he had. A few moments later, he noticed the guy's voice and saw where he was, so it was definitely instantaneous movement. Jason didn't think it would just jump out of his inventory and merge. He would have died if he didn't have the skill to move in the shadows. It was impressive firepower, and he needed to be careful when he was going to combine the fourth part. The man wondered what was wrong with this guy. It turned out that he had just used the highest level of stealth and movement skill. But what was he anyway, so he turned to him. The hero noticed that the master was not surprised in such a strange voice. But at that moment, his interlocutor grabbed him by the throat. Then he dragged him to the wall and hit him quite hard because he saw some kind of threat in this person because of his abilities. Jason wondered what had suddenly happened to him, since he was doing this because he did not expect to be attacked right now. The man took advantage of his weakness and shouted that he couldn't use dark skills without dark mana. But he had just used the skill of moving in the shadows, so let him give him an explanation right now. The hero wondered how he could explain it at all.